Now I'm going to show the transmission itself, and the whole transmission, just show the presentation itself, but to avoid for the Zoom instead for them to see the presentation over here and the transmissions over here. But on YouTube, it's going to go that one as well. Right? Ok, obrigado, Wesley. A gente vai começar então.
We are quite advanced now with the platform.
All right. Bom, boa tarde a todo mundo agora, obrigado para valer. Vocês estão no YouTube aqui também, né? Eu queria dar boas-vindas a todos vocês, em especial eu queria dar boas-vindas aqui ao pessoal da Alemanha, Dr. I'm sorry for my pronunciation. Kevin Meinhausen, Maria Wong, Dr. Dietrich Schmidt. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for being with us and for sharing your knowledge, sharing your experience on ecosystem stuff. Bom, a gente segue, então, eles vão iniciar, a gente vai iniciar, mas e obrigado a você também. Eu desculpo você. Pode ser, quem não conhece, é o parceiro da Embrapa, né? E está junto no projeto. E lá na Indiscórdia tem um grupo de Indiscórdia que também me enviaram aqui, nessa etapa do projeto. Vocês vão conhecer daqui a pouco um pouco mais de detalhes, que a Maria vai fazer. O Carlos de Sobra, o professor da Universidade de Sobra, com outros alunos também estão participando do projeto, e está iniciando, na verdade, né? Então a gente está fazendo essa reunião justamente para começar a botar o pé no chão no nosso projeto, tá? Mais uma vez, obrigado, thank you very much. E a gente começa com Maria, ou você quer falar alguma coisa também, né? Não, você quer falar também? Why not? Yes. And then, vocês sentem confortáveis com inglês, todo mundo, não precisa de tradução, né? Bom, se tiver alguma coisa chegando, eles erguem a mão aí, a gente dá uma paradinha e ele interrompe, eu amaria tudo, né? But just saying, if there is any English problem, just let us know, then we stop, then the speaker will go, and then we make it understand. Sure. All right, go ahead.
So, thank you very much for hosting us and for coming today. I know that some of you are busy with preparing for your exams, and I know that each hour counts. Thank you for being here. And I'm very delighted that we have the opportunity with a whole group of colleagues and scientists to be with our Brazilian friends and colleagues who we have been working on developing a research proposal for many, many years already, and now we've got the very pleasant task to kick this project off in a few weeks from now. And this gives me great pleasure. We've spent the last days seeing some science that we will be able to carry out some research on, I hope, and we will have further interesting discussions during the next few days. So it's very exciting for us to be here after the pandemic, where we've all not been very close to each other, and I think we will use this opportunity now to connect again and to prepare this beautiful project. And some of you may hear of it and maybe contribute to it in some way or the other. And with our small seminar that we will have today, I think we can share some of the work that we do or have done in the past to inspire some discussions on what we can do together in the future. With this, I will stop and hand over to Maria to present a little bit this project.
Eu posso passar.
Então, deixa eu só virar a câmera para você. Pode virar aqui assim.
Já vai começar, não? Pode passar? Esse aqui é do... Esse é o dele.
Pode deixar eu achar aqui para você. Pessoal, desculpa o improviso, tá?
O ecossistema.
Agora, durante a tela. PDF?
É PDF, mas não mais também.
Ctrl L.
Ctrl L, geralmente. Um pouco melhor. Era não. Está no movimento. É porque esse PDF, esse teu programa não é A12, né?
Eu acho que não é.
Não. Eu faço assim, então.
Aí está achando o programa dele. Bom, vamos para a apresentação aqui. Você quer que eu faça?
Não, faço.
Eu acho que
Não vai não. Vai na deve devagar.
Esse não vai registrar também.
O quê?
Acho que é a apresentação, não? Ok.
A gente fica bem assim.
Você quer essa parte? Então,
Não, obrigada. Bom dia a todos. Boa tarde, bom dia. Então, eu vou apresentar um programa para vocês. Primeiro eu queria dizer uma brincadeirinha, isso é bem comum de acontecer na Alemanha. Os nomes são gigantes, enormes, porque os nomes são tão grandes, a gente sempre faz uma abreviação. E esse é o caso do nome desse programa. I just said that was a bit of joke because German names are so large that we always have to have a short name for it. Então, a nossa abreviação para esse programa é o ecossistêmicos, é assim que a gente chama, né? E ecossistêmicos, ou o nome real, vamos dizer assim, eu vou falar em inglês, só o nome do projeto, né? Improving the sustainable management of the Brazilian Cerrado through quantifying and valorizing ecosystem services of silvopastoris, né? Ou seja, nesse projeto que a gente espera começar agora em outubro, com a duração de 3 anos, eu vou dar aqui um overview do que a gente está pensando que vai ser, do que a gente submeteu e até agora foi aprovado, não tem aprovação ainda final, mas informalmente nós temos aprovação, a gente espera que realmente inicie agora em outubro. Então, vou apresentar para vocês assim, um geralzão do que é, né? O que a gente pretende fazer dentro dele. Esse projeto está dividido no que a gente chama de working packages, que são os pacotes de trabalho. A gente tem basicamente 6 pacotes de trabalho, onde parceiros vão trabalhando de maneira diferente, tá vendo? E no finalzinho eu vou mostrar para vocês qual é o período de tempo que a gente está pensando, nas atividades. Acho que isso pode ser importante e relevante também. Vai ter interesse em participar com alguns colaboradores.
Vou te interromper você. O pessoal do YouTube está tendo que falar um pouquinho mais alto, porque o microfone está lá.
Tá aqui.
Obrigado.
Tá mais pertinho. Ok. Bom, antes de eu começar, eu queria só dizer que eu, na verdade, sou economista, tá? Assim, a minha área, na verdade, não é o Cerrado. Eu sou especializada em métodos quantitativos Então, assim, eu me sinto até um pouco... Eu não me sinto no direito de falar sobre o Cerrado com vocês, tá? Porque eu acho que o público, nesse sentido, conhece muito mais do que quem está aqui na frente, tá? Então, algumas partes, assim, eu vou pular, porque eu acho que vocês sabem muito bem qual é o problema da região e que a região enfrenta, né? Essa foi uma apresentação que a gente também mostrou para o Ministério da Agricultura na Alemanha, então, assim, a gente teve que apresentar para eles, né? No caso, a gente havia um pouco mais do que eles, né? Mas vocês, com certeza, sabem, nesse ponto, a importância do Cerrado e dos sistemas silvopastoris dentro desse meio ambiente, tá? A gente fica também muito longa. Bom, então, alguns objetivos específicos que a gente tem, eles dependem de... Cada pacote de trabalho tem os seus objetivos específicos, né? Os resultados que a gente espera alcançar e como ele vai contribuir para os próximos pacotes de trabalho. Ou seja, mais ou menos realmente uma sequência temporal que a gente tem, tá? Se vocês tiverem qualquer pergunta, pode levantar, mas... Dentro do... Eu vou diminuir um pouquinho, porque eu acho que está muito grande, vocês não estão conseguindo ver as imagens todas, né? Pronto. E eu vou explicando dentro do pacote de trabalho, que faz mais sentido. Bom, a gente tem os nossos parceiros de projeto, os nossos parceiros na Alemanha, que é a universidade que a gente trabalha, chama Hochschule Rheinland, por isso tem um HSW, a Universidade de Freiburg, com o professor Mitfock. A gente ainda tem mais duas empresas privadas que participam também, a Berlin Organics e a Agrícola, né? A Berlin Organics, ela faz certificação de produtos silvopastorais, ou de produtos agropecuários, né, ou agrícolas, no caso, e a Unic, ela também faz um trabalho bem legal de uso de terras em geral, na verdade. Bom, então a gente tem os parceiros aqui no Brasil, também a Embrapa, a forte ajuda e colaboração do Audici. Queria agradecer mais uma vez esse Audici, porque realmente é um parceiro que faz muito mais do que ele deveria fazer, eu acredito. A Universidade de Brasília, com o Heraldo, tem mais outros colegas também, a Universidade Federal de Viçosa, a Emater, a Central Cerrado, que vocês conhecem. E um parceiro internacional que vai entrar no pacote de trabalho, que é a Universidade de Maryland. A gente tem uma área de estudo, na verdade, que ela está meio dinâmica, sabe? A gente inicialmente pensou que seria no norte de Minas, né? Ou seja, a área do Cerrado Norte de Minas, que vai até o Mato Grosso. Essa área, na verdade, ela pode sofrer ainda uma alteração, né? Depende de como os nossos parceiros locais se comportem, né? Obviamente, mesmo que haja uma alteração, deve ser dentro do Cerrado, porque esse é o foco do projeto, né? Mas exatamente aonde pode ser que se modifique um pouquinho. Como eu falei para vocês, a gente vai trabalhar dentro desses work plan, ou né, o que a gente chama de working package, então planos de trabalho são 6, né? Então, cada work plan, ele tem um líder e ele tem os contribuidores, né? Quem vai contribuir para isso. Né? No caso desse primeiro work plan, ele realmente meio que segue assim, uma certa série temporal. Começa no primeiro, porque o primeiro ele contribui para os outros pacotes também, né? Então, aqui no primeiro work plan, a gente vai ter duas atividades, né? Work plan e atividade. A primeira vai mapear a distribuição da área dos FTS, né? Em associação com os atributos do meio ambiente e da infraestrutura. Então, eu não vou ler tudo, né? Mas se vocês quiserem, depois a gente pode oferecer os slides, né? Através do professor Cerrado, para vocês verem em detalhe, né? A próxima atividade também é modelar as SPCS, né? Modelar a distribuição dos SPCS e também as mudanças climáticas, né? E prever cenários futuros, né? Esse pacote, como eu falei, vai ser liderado pela UNB. A gente tem alguns resultados que a gente espera a partir desse pacote, obviamente. E muito importante também é que esse pacote vai contribuir para os próximos. Tá? Então, com esses resultados que a gente espera obter, a gente vai utilizar esses próximos pacotes também. O segundo work plan vai ser liderado pela Embrapa, pela pessoa do OCI, e vai ter como contribuidores, né, 4 outros parceiros. Né? Nesse pacote, a gente vai... É um pacote um pouco mais longo, vocês podem ver que tem 3 atividades, 1, 2, 3, né? A gente vai tentar captar, determinar a qualidade, a quantidade de indicadores, por exemplo, de cada espécie, ou seja, a biodiversidade na espécie. Depois a gente vai ter uma forma de medição do estoque de carbono na espécie. Na última atividade desse pacote vai ser como acessar, como medir a conservação do solo e da água também. Tá? Mais uma vez, né, esse pacote ele continua a contribuir para os próximos que vem. Então, assim, é meio que a gente vai juntando, né, todos os ingredientes, né, para fazer o bolo final. O pacote 3, quem vai ser o líder é a Universidade de Freiburg, na pessoa do nosso caríssimo professor Pipoca. E aqui a gente vai analisar a parte socioeconômica, também é uma parte, né, a gente também está como contribuidor, aí eu entro mais específico, né? Então, também é um pacote um pouco mais longo, vocês podem notar que alguns pacotes são mais curtos, outros são mais longos. E a nossa ideia também é que os alunos de doutorado, de doutorado que vão se agregar a esse pacote, né, que eles também se sintam à vontade de decidir qual pacote que eles acham que eles poderiam, obviamente, contribuir da melhor maneira. Né? Ou seja, a nossa intenção é que vocês também se sintam à vontade de trabalhar naquilo que vocês acham que fazem melhor. Né? Tá? Aqui também é um pouco mais longo. Nesse a gente vai tentar, ou pretende, né, conduzir alguns questionários, tá? Ou seja, esse vai ser, assim, todos vão ser trabalhosos, essa é a verdade, né? Esse talvez demore um pouquinho mais de tempo, porque questionários em áreas rurais realmente tem que se locomover, né? Imagina, se a gente quer pelo menos 300 questionários preenchidos, então você tem que ter 300 famílias, então imagina, né? Você pegar e conversar com 300 diferentes famílias realmente algo que leva bastante tempo, né? Dá para você ver que 10 minutos responde mais rápido possível as perguntas né? Você tem que pegar, tomar um cafezinho e tudo mais. Então, esse é um work plan que a gente acha que realmente vai demorar um pouco mais, mas não só o questionário, mas também depois a gente vai usar esses dados para analisar a profitabilidade, né, do STS, em relação, obviamente, a outros tipos de uso, né, de uso da terra. E a gente vai também tentar modelar esse serviço de ecossistemas, né, o serviço de ecossistemas integrados. No quarto work plan, a gente vai ter os colegas da Federal de Sobre, que vão ser os líderes, mas obviamente os contribuidores também trabalham, né, de maneira harmônica aí. Pacote um pouco mais curtinho, com 2 atividades, mas também, né, com bastante trabalho para quem se identifica aqui na área. Né. Aqui vai ser mais uma parte de como manejar, como administrar, vamos dizer assim, esses sistemas, né, como os sistemas são adotados, né, qual é a regulação do ambiente nesses sistemas e qual é a melhor maneira, ou analisar quais são os determinantes que vão fazer esse sistema trabalhar ou funcionar de maneira ótima, né, otimizada. Tá? Então, a gente tem o próximo, o quinto, que é o meu favorito, né, que é a monetização dos serviços ecossistêmicos. E, bom, primeiro é meu favorito porque realmente é a minha área de pesquisa, né? Então, aqui nós vamos ter os 3 contribuidores, que são os contribuidores privados, assim, né? Que são essas empresas, não são universidades, né? Vamos dizer assim. É um pouco também mais longo, nesse a gente vai tentar, o nosso objetivo é tentar mapear e analisar o mercado, toda a cadeia de mercado, toda a cadeia de valor, como essa cadeia de valor está adicionando impacto global ao produto, ou seja, quem está beneficiando mais, quem está beneficiando menos, como é que a gente pode corrigir, ou quais seriam as políticas necessárias para corrigir para corrigir como é que eu vou chamar para vocês? Agora a palavra em português me fugiu da mente. Faz sempre que eu não falo português aqui dando seminário, né? Mas como corrigir essa disparidade, né? Social, vamos dizer assim, socioeconômica, né? Como corrigir essa disparidade na cadeia produtiva. Ou seja, a questão do lucro, né? Não que a gente, obviamente, não que a gente sabe que é um projeto de 3 anos e a gente provavelmente não vai resolver os problemas da região com isso, mas pelo menos a gente vai indicar algumas políticas, né? Essa intenção é indicar políticas no final que possam, de fato, ser tomadas algum dia, espero, né? Pelos governantes, tá? Ou com quem está fazendo política pública na área. Tá? Bom, daí segue a atividade de 2 e 3, a gente também vai determinar o desenvolvimento dessa cadeia produtiva, e depois a gente vai, de novo, né, modelar esses serviços ecossistêmicos. O último workplan, na verdade, ele está aqui, mas ele é um workplan mais, assim, esse fica com a gente, né, assim, todos contribuem, mas ele é um workplan que a gente organiza, né, assim, na verdade, é como todo é organizado, né. Aqui, né, o importante para vocês é saber, na verdade, quais são, o que a gente espera ter no final. Então, não, a gente espera que a gente tenha pelo menos, né, isso vai depender também muito dos alunos, né, obviamente, que a gente tenha pelo menos 12 artigos científicos, o número que a gente quer atingir com isso, né, apresentados ou submetidos, tá, no final desses 3 anos, ao longo desses 3 anos, né, que a gente tenha pelo menos 12 estadias de pesquisadores convidados, ou seja, tanto brasileiros na Alemanha, como alemães e, né, americanos aqui no Brasil, né, assim vai, que a gente tenha pelo menos a submissão de 10 teses de mestrado e 8 teses de doutorado. Esse número é óbvio que pode, né, assim, essa é a nossa meta, né, na verdade é uma meta bem a gente espera atingir, né? Mas assim, é óbvio que ao longo do tempo aí podem existir outras limitações, a gente vai trabalhar no sentido de atingir essa meta. Bom, nós vamos ter também, já no começo do ano que vem, se não me engano, em março, um seminário um pouco maior, cerca de 1 semana, na verdade. Aqui eu acredito que 3 dias, né? Esse seminário convida também os colegas de pós, e nesse seminário também a gente está planejando ter uma produção simultânea, que vai ter um seminário realmente longo, muito intensivo, de todos. Nós vamos ter mais colegas também, alemães que vão para cá, né? Então, não se preocupem, vocês vão estar em português. Mas daqui para lá também tem um tempinho para estudar, né, inglês. A gente espera que seja em março do ano que vem, né? Essa é a primeira. Então, vamos lá. Isso aqui eu já falei. Algumas coisas eu já falei. Eu só queria mostrar para vocês aqui o que a gente tem mais ou menos de período, até para quem tem interesse em participar, quem tem interesse em se mobilizar para fazer parte desse projeto com a gente, né? Eu acho que é interessante vocês olharem que a gente projeta assim, de tempo, né? Para vocês se organizarem no curso de vocês e tudo. Então, a gente, né? Na verdade, aqui até tem 23, mas esse aqui tem que ser modificado, na verdade, um pouco. Mas o projeto ele vai agora, como ele tinha inicialmente a intenção de começar em 1º de janeiro de 2023, mas o Ministério do Aumento para a gente começar mais cedo, né? Então, aqui, como eu falei, nós temos aqui, né, todas as nossas metas de tese de doutorado. Então, o interessante que vocês verem que a gente acha que é necessário, por exemplo, a gente acha que é necessário um aluno de PhD, um aluno de doutorado, né, para o nosso primeiro teste, ou seja, se a gente tiver 2 ou 3 pessoas que estão interessadas no primeiro teste, né, na verdade, já para um, né? Já para o segundo, a gente tem um pouco mais, aí a gente tem dois, então a gente poderia ficar 2 alunos aqui. Aqui no terceiro a gente tem também 2, então no quarto a gente tem 1 e no quinto a gente tem 2. Né? Óbvio, né, dependendo da disponibilidade de vocês, de como a gente vai utilizar os recursos também, e pode modificar isso, né? Isso é uma ideia inicial que a gente fez para o projeto. O foco, na verdade, é pegar os alunos que a gente acredita que vão executar o trabalho da melhor forma possível a gente e também para vocês, né? Óbvio. A oportunidade que a gente oferece para vocês também é passar um semestre na Alemanha, isso também está incluído no projeto, né? Exatamente quando será esse semestre que a gente pode negociar, né? Porque o projeto dura 3 anos, então depende de como é que vocês estão aqui no curso de vocês, né? O que vocês pretendem, quando vocês pretendem terminar e tudo mais, né? Mais eu quero fazer. Perdão? Não, o projeto ele inicia, na verdade, agora, assim, ele deveria iniciar em 1º de 2023, ele vai iniciar agora, provavelmente em outubro. Pode ser que talvez 1º de novembro, a gente não tem ainda, vamos dizer assim, a canetada final, né? A gente espera que seja 1º de outubro. Então, são 3 anos, né? Tá? O que está também super interessante para vocês é a bolsa, mesmo vocês vão, né? Atividade, incentivo econômico, né? Eu venho da economia, então eu tenho que dizer isso, né? Então tem esse incentivo econômico, é óbvio, né? Do oferecimento da bolsa, e também do pós-graduação lá, né? 6 meses lá. Fora, assim, né, de ter a chance de participar desse projeto, a gente realmente está com um coração bem feliz de fazer parte dessa mudança e de estar, de fato, entregar nossa contribuição para a melhoria do bem-estar, para a melhoria da renda das famílias do Cerrado, para a redução da degradação do Cerrado. Obrigada. A gente faz would we make the questions now or at the end?
If you have questions, we can take them now.
Se vocês quiserem perguntar alguma coisa, fique à vontade, especialmente sobre o projeto, e se não, no final a gente vai abrir mais oportunidade de falar, né? Mas agora também vai ter super oportunidade. Não tem questões, a gente segue. Isso é muito bom. Catado tudo, né?
Eu dei para cada um R$5, entendeu? Eu estava passando aqui. Era para eles ficarem caladinhos.
Tá bom. Bom, então a gente dá sequência. The next one is...
the term yes, and then my yes is property. I always know yes. I think it works.
I think you could make it a little bit smaller than this, because sometimes there is might be credit.
I will make it smaller if the slide is bigger. Okay, thank you very much. Yes, no, thank you for having us again. I'm going to talk a little bit about socioeconomics of agroforestry. And I'm not going to talk about the Cerrado so much today, because I think, as Maria said already, you know much more about the Cerrado than we do now. I hope in 3 years we know much more as well. But with the presentation now, I would like to give you some examples of work that we have done on socioeconomic questions related to agroforestry, which might inspire some work. Some of you thinking about a topic for research or working already on your thesis, etc. And maybe some of these aspects might inspire you, and we will have some discussion on that later. So for you to understand where I am coming from, I hold a PhD in tropical forestry. I've done a lot of work in Eastern Africa and a little bit in Southeast Asia. And I've concentrated on socioeconomic aspects of tropical forestry. So I've investigated land tenure questions or the dissemination of agroforestry technologies in rural communities and the role of social networks and so on. Then I had left science for some years, and I've been working as a business consultant in the agribusiness sector. And this was the reason why I've been appointed professor of agribusiness, which I am at the moment. And in my research, in our research, we try to link these two areas, the agricultural sector, agribusiness sector, and the forestry sector. And this has led us to investigate agroforestry systems, which are a natural intersection of these two sectors, of course. And we've done a lot of work on long-term forest products as well. And in our beautiful project, I think these things come nicely together, as you could see already from our work. So what I'm trying to talk to you about today, I mean, agroforestry, you know, I don't need to teach you, is the integration of some trees and some crops and sometimes also a bit of animals. Yeah? This is a picture which we have taken during our previous excursion, I think in was it also in Mina? I don't remember exactly the place. A coffee farm, a smallholder coffee farm. It's a very beautiful example of how agroforestry can look like a practice. Sometimes you see also some chicken walking around on the ground and so on. So you have all these three components. But agroforestry can look totally different in other places. And now I make it a bit smaller. I think here. I mean, this is also very clear to you. Yeah? There are lots of systems to classify these thousands and maybe millions of practices that we call agroforestry. Very local knowledge, very traditional practices sometimes also very scientifically investigated and very well developed already, and then they can be grouped according to different dimensions. The components they contain plants and animals or things like this. Sometimes they involve insects, sometimes they involve fish, sometimes they don't, etc. You can classify them according to their structure and their arrangement in space, maybe planting in rows or planting around the boundaries of a farm and so on. They can be classified by their geographical distribution, the climatic zones they are available in and so on. And this already describes, again, the fact that if we talk about agroforestry, we talk about thousands of different systems and thousands of different practices. Yeah? This is very important for us to understand. And I mean, we could see this also during the past days. Yeah? I will come to this in a second. Just to give you a bit of an impression where we stand in agroforestry terms in Europe. And I think, Peter, you are going to talk a little bit about some examples, or maybe one slide. We have rich traditional knowledge and practices we had, I should say, in Europe on agroforestry as well. But it has one loss in many places. Yeah? And now, I think this is a topic which gains importance in Europe because people, policymakers, big farmers, scientists, of course, as well understand that agroforestry can add a lot of benefits to the environment, to farmers, to the social, to the whole society, etc. So we have a few really big research projects going on at the moment, aiming to investigate agroforestry practices and to develop new practices in Europe as well. And one of these projects in the past has made this assessment on agroforestry in Europe, and you can see it's not so much. There are how many 140 million hectares in Europe of agricultural land where agroforestry practices could be feasible and would be valuable, but in the end, we just how many 15.4 or 60 million hectares. So that's just a very, very small area, and most of it is actually silvopastoris agroforestry, similar to the system that we will be working on here in the Cerrado. So silvopastoris systems are very important also in Europe, and you see most of them are actually located in the Mediterranean area, countries like Portugal or Spain, a little bit in Italy as well. So in Germany, agroforestry doesn't play a role at the moment, unfortunately. But we are working to change this. Yeah, we have recently won a project with some colleagues of ours, and we would like to help our local farmers along the university to develop agroforestry practices and to try out some new systems which fit the current market conditions and the current political, agricultural political conditions and so on. So this is where we stand, and now let's go a little bit into the Cerrado just to illustrate again what I said. So when we talk about silvopastoral systems or silvopastoral systems, like the ones, they can be very different. Yeah? You have seen these, or we have seen in a few days, these very intensively managed pastures with rows of eucalyptus trees, or the autochthonous traditional systems you are very familiar with, of course. And it's very clear that when we talk of agroforestry, both systems are totally different, but still they are agroforestry. They are different in terms of the economics, they are different in terms of the environmental benefits, they are different in terms of the management practices that are required, and many other aspects. And I think we will try to understand a little bit better what some of this may mean in our project, maybe together with your help. Okay. Now, in principle, there exists a trade-off. This is at least what many generations of students have been told by their professors in previous years. A trade-off between structural complexity, or you can simplify it as biodiversity on one hand, and economic profitability on the other hand. And this relationship typically goes like downward sloping. Yeah? If we talk of a system which is very simple in its structure, like a monocropping or monoculture, it's typically financially very profitable. And the more complex the system gets, the more species are involved, and the more biodiversity aspects come into play, the profitability of the system goes down. And we see this simplifying, talking about systems like monoculture, arable cropping, and then some horticulture orchard where there might already be a little bit more species diversity and some trees involved, agroforestry, a combination of crops and trees, and finally a natural forest, if you want. Maybe not a man-made plantation, but a natural forest which is very complex in its ecological dimensions and structure and ecological relationships and so on, but not as productive, of course. And this is the issue. That's why many farmers, in particular the large farmers, don't like, in Germany, I should say, maybe some of the big other businesses in Brazil as well, they don't like complex systems. They like to plant soy, or they like to plant traditional crops in Europe. And I think what we aim to do also with our project is exactly moving this part up a little bit by what they call multifunctional woody polyculture. We try to increase the profitability, financial returns to farmers of an agroforestry system which is relatively rich in biodiversity, is not doing as good as a national forest would do. The natural Cerrado, of course, is much more valuable in ecological terms in terms of biodiversity, carbon fixation, and water retention and things like this. But it's much of an improvement compared to a traditional classical agricultural system. Yeah? So this is what we aim at, and I think there's lots of research going on in this direction. And what I have put in the title as well, sometimes this is not only good for economic and ecological reasons, but it also increases incentives for farmers to practice such a system. Yeah? If we can include additional benefits in terms of products that can be harvested in addition to the pasture or agricultural products, and products which farmers value, maybe because they offer market opportunity or because they are traditionally important, or because they might add to family nutrition or many other dimensions, then they are more likely to accept such systems. And this is what we aim at with our project. And I think what scientists generally working on agroforestry should consider more and more. And this is how such a system works in principle. If we talk about a polyculture involving different shrubs and trees and other plant components, they are typically composed such that they mature in over different periods of time. So their growing cycle or growing behavior is different. When there are very early fruiting crops which can give profits in the very early years right after planting such a system, and some of the other maybe more valuable crops take some more time to mature or to produce fruits. As we've learned during the last days, if you plant a bamboo tree, it takes at least 4 years, maybe longer, before it can yield some products. And of course, a farmer needs to bridge these 4 years, otherwise they wouldn't be able to convert their farm. So this is the principle, combining different elements which give benefits to farmers, different benefits maybe, and also over the entire project or lifetime of such a system. Now, why is agroforestry such a great idea? This is because of, let me say, biological interactions between the components of the system. I'm not a crop physiologist or an agronomist, so this is not my specialty, but the principle, and you are very well aware of this, I'm quite sure, is that we need to combine plants and trees and animals which have a synergistic relationship with each other. So ideally, one element in the system benefits the other element of the system, and this gives additional yield, for example, or additional income to the farm. So very simply spoken, the roots of the trees, which go very deep into the soil, can maybe pump up the water or the nutrients and make them available to the crops or to the grass which grows in between the trees. Or maybe the flowers of the trees attract some insects which are important as pollinators for the agricultural crops and so on. So these are the types of relationships, and these relationships make agroforestry systems so beneficial in many dimensions. So when we talk about agroforestry, however, we need to be open and objective, of course, and shouldn't close our eyes that sometimes you also have negative relationships between the components. And I think this is a very beautiful graph because it shows exactly this, the various relationships that might exist between the tree components and here the crops, like looking like maize plants. But it can also apply to animals. If we look into the behavior or the metabolism of cattle grazing on a silvopastoris farm. And what we see here are different components of the total benefit of an agroforestry system. Of course, there's something like the direct replacement. If you plant a tree, on a farm, at the place where the tree grows, no crop can grow. Yeah? And this is, or sometimes also it's the shade effect, as you can see here, or the competition of roots for nutrients and for water and so on. This is the reason why many farmers in Germany don't like agroforestry. They believe, or they think, that shade might be detrimental to their crops. And to some crops it is. Yeah? But to some other crops, or at some more further distance to the trees, typically you've got beneficial effects related, for example, to reducing evaporation, because the trees will stop the wind or will lower down the wind velocity, and then plants transpire less water, which means getting very hot seasons, as we experience them in some parts of Europe at the moment, these plants could grow better, depending on the species, of course, that we talk about. So what we need to understand for agroforestry systems is how do these beneficial and negative effects look like exactly. And now remember what I said at the beginning. If we talk about agroforestry in general, such an analysis is not possible. Yeah? We need to look into very specific systems in very specific conditions, on very specific sites. And this is also what we will have to do in our project, understanding not just the autochthonous silvopastoris systems, but we will look into a gradient of different systems with different tree species densities, different tree species, different types of grassland, etc. And then for each of these, such an evaluation can be done in order to understand what is likely of the benefits. Do the benefits outweigh the costs or the negative aspects of such a plant interaction? Okay. Ideally, if the agronomists have done their job well in designing these systems, we will learn that most agroforestry systems, for most agroforestry systems, productivity is larger than for separated systems. Yeah, I put this example down here. If you imagine two monocropping systems of, let me say, some cereals and some trees, both of which, or 80 hectares of cereals and 60 hectares of trees, if you combine them, ideally, you can produce the same quantity of output on smaller land. Yeah? And this is termed the land equivalent ratio, and expressed as this ratio of, crop yields under agroforestry compared to the crop yields without agroforestry. And if the factor is larger than 1, we can get more yields compared to the monoculture system. And this makes agroforestry such an advantageous practice. Yeah? And with this, of course, we can also conclude that it can be a solution, agroforestry can be a solution to the continuing land conversion which is going on. Yeah? Because human population is still growing, demand for food is still growing, farmers just expand their farms into the natural Cerrado or into other areas. And if we understand to produce more crops on 1 hectare of land, we need less conversion. I think that's the beautiful idea, with sustainably intensifying productivity of some land use types. Agroforestry can be a solution. However, and here I have learned a lot over the last years, I need to admit, it's too simple to assume that if you produce 50% more or so on agroforestry, we can reduce the amount of land one by one in terms of not immediate expansion. Yeah, we know that there are these so-called rebound effects, and they can really spoil the system. And this is because humans act rationally in some old-fashioned economic way. Yeah? If we intensify production on one part of land, this has an effect on the market price, yeah? If we do this large scale. So maybe the cost of production goes down, and the prices of these agricultural products go down, and then demand of these products increase, which give price signals to other market participants and induce more farmers to grow this same crop, and this will drive maybe some further conversion. So the system is not fixed, the system is highly dynamic. And for this reason, I think to be very honest and very well understand this, the land use effect of agroforestry will require us to also think about rebound effect. But this is probably the topic for another project. This is nothing we can do in our current project. Unfortunately, it's just a warning. I think we should be very careful and very aware of these potentially negative effects as well. And in essence, I think this is a beautiful graph, even though it might look a little bit chaotic. Whether or not agroforestry will eventually help to kind of protect the environment and release pressure on natural landscapes by concentrating production and concentrating agricultural activities on land and giving additional environmental benefits and social and other benefits to communities depends on the nature of the trade-off that exists between competing objectives. We know that very often we cannot reach ecological objectives and productivity objectives at the same time. There are trade-offs. Either a system is highly productive or a system is highly environmentally beneficial. Sometimes there are combinations of both of that, as for example indicated by such a curve, where we would say, okay, an intermediate level of trees can give us high ecological benefits, but also high economic benefits. But this depends on the very specific elements of the system that we look at. For some other trees and crop combinations, the curve could maybe look like this, and then that's a clear case of a descendant the other way. So it depends very much what systems do we design, which elements do these systems contain, and only then we know which benefits in terms of environmental, social, or other dimensions these systems can generate, and what the ideal combination or the ideal amount of these systems is that we require. Okay, now talking briefly about ecosystem services. I mean, we've touched on this already, and I'm sure we will discuss this later on as well. You know, there are different types of ecosystem services: provisioning services, regulating services, cultural or supporting services, and forests or trees, or let's say agroforestry, provides a lot of these services. Starting from the products that we can extract, but also the pollination I've mentioned already, or the water filtration, the carbon sequestration, and things like this. And all of this has direct relationships to different dimensions of human well-being. That's not new. I think you are very aware of this. And I have now just picked a few dimensions here to illustrate some of the elements or some of the topics that we might look into in our project. One refers to human nutrition, food security, or quality of nutrition. And it's important for us to understand that tree products or agroforestry can contribute at least in two dimensions or in two pathways to this to human food and nutrition objectives. Either directly, because farmers can collect the fruits from the Cerrado or from the trees they grow on their farm and consume them. That's very common still in quite a number of places. At the same time, they can also collect these products and sell them. And the income they generate will allow them to buy food or maybe other important items they require. And of course, farmers can do both at the same time, and very many farmers actually do. So when we investigate the contribution of trees or agroforestry on household well-being and nutrition aspects in particular, we need to look into both of these dimensions. It can be quite complicated though, because within the same community there might be people who depend on the foods more for their direct consumption, whilst others might want to use it primarily as a source of cash income. And with increasing market prices for some of the products, we would like to look at Cerrado, for example. There are incentives for farmers to collect a lot and sell them in order to get rich very quickly. Yeah, many farmers want to get rich very quickly. But then, of course, less of these products, of these foods are available for those families which depend on them for their own nutrition. Let's not talk about some of the seeds remaining on site in order to allow regeneration or wildlife to benefit from it. Yeah? So all of these aspects are important and we will have to investigate them as well. And this is an example of some of the wild foods that exist in Kenya, in Eastern Africa, illustrating that in terms of food security, these trees or forest products can make, or agroforestry products can make very important contributions because many of them are available during the hunger season. This is after harvest, right? People have sold their maize and have sold their crops because they needed cash, and what's left are basically the wild fruits around their villages. Many of these fruits are rich in vitamins, micronutrients, and so on. So consuming them ensures that some people, in particular the vulnerable poor people, don't starve. Yeah? That's very important, and an additional topic which is very important to investigate. But it also offers business opportunities. I mentioned already the markets for many of the products are booming. Europeans, at least before the pandemic and before the Ukraine war and so on, were very or increasingly conscious of consuming sustainable, natural diets and foods like this. Now we've got increasing inflation rates and economic problems. This will for sure change the composition of foods humans, like Europeans will consume, of course. So we don't know how this market is going to develop in the future. But illustrated here are some of the products that can be made of the baobab fruits. I'm sure, Katie, you're going to talk more about it. One of the products we have had asked dealing with this beautiful African non-sugar forest product. And all these products you can buy in Malawi, which is a small country in the southeastern part of the African continent. This very rich and dynamic industry sector has developed over the last 10 or 15 years alongside with the export market. You can buy baobab products, baobab powder, baobab juices, and many other products in Europe now. The pulp is highly nutritious, but I'm stopping. I'm going to stop, otherwise Katie can talk more about it. I just wanted to illustrate a lot of small and medium enterprises have developed many different products, have created jobs, have created business opportunities for local entrepreneurs in Africa, in the African market, all building on these tree products. And I think it's our intention with this ecosystem project to also contribute to this, by providing the sustainable resource base that is needed to build processing industries and trading businesses and so on. Now, let's talk a little bit about financial aspects already. I've mentioned that many farmers in Europe are critical of agroforestry, and to some extent, I think, we can understand where this comes from, because when purely assessing the financial benefits of agroforestry, in many parts of the continent, the monocropping systems are simply more profitable. But why is this? It's not because agroforestry is a human practice. No, this is because of the current legal and market conditions. Yeah, that's very clear. Because the market doesn't account for the environmental damage that these highly intensive agricultural systems actually create. All the nitrogen kind of emissions that spoil our groundwater, all the herbicides that kill insects and so on, all of this is not taken into account in the financial kind of analysis and the financial performance of that farmers do, like the financial analysis that farmers do. However, even under the current conditions, we see that agroforestry gives higher benefits in the Mediterranean area. That's for the climatic conditions. And the highly customized and traditional systems that exist there. Now, the picture changes entirely if we also account for these ecosystem services which agroforestry systems provide. Yeah, then we see that the red bar is constantly above the gray boxes, which means that agroforestry systems perform better in all the geographies and climatic conditions that we have in Europe. And I think this is what we aim at with our project as well. We would like to contribute to knowledge and present the facts and the data, assessing the benefits in terms of, you've seen it in Maria's presentation, in terms of biodiversity, carbon, and water, I think. Soil. Because this is important. This will change the equation. And hopefully motivate policymakers and other decision makers to change the frame conditions. The legislation is necessary, or the institutional framework which is required to give agroforestry a level playing field, if you want, over intensive agriculture. And of course, we know also agroforestry systems are more resilient than monocropping systems in light of climate change. This is very important. Resilience here is illustrated by 2 dimensions, if you want. A more species diverse system will not be affected as dramatically as a monocropping system, so the change in productivity is not as significant if some shock occurs, some dry season, like dry spell or something like this, as we experience it in Europe at the moment, and the system doesn't take as long to recover its productivity. These are 2 dimensions which are important. Agroforestry can contribute to it, and as I said, in Europe now people start to get awake and to realize with changing conditions in terms of lack of rainfall and lots of wildfires, etc., something needs to change. Let's briefly talk about adoption as well. I think you've seen that this is part of what package 4. We'd like to understand what are the factors which drive farmers to accept agroforestry and to practice it on their farm. Again, remember what I said, it's relatively useless to talk about adoption of agroforestry in general. We need to understand what are the specific conditions for a specific system in a specific region and for a specific farm. One farmer might find it beneficial, and the other farmer, the neighboring farmer, might not find it beneficial because of their internal farm economics, the labor they have or not have, the land size they own or need to rent, and so on and so on. So many factors contribute to a decision whether or not farmers like to practice agroforestry. In Europe, I've just given some examples. Very often farmers do not adopt agroforestry because it requires high investment costs. You need to plant trees, and the trees don't give fruits or cannot be harvested after 1 year, like you do with an agricultural crop. We don't have financial support. Although this is changing, the new agricultural policy in Europe will also allow farmers to receive subsidy payment for agroforestry systems. This is now coming. Although the rules are kind of very rigid, and many farmers would like to, or we believe that much more could be done in order to make this attractive to farmers. Lack of long-term data, which gives rise to the perception of lack of profitability. Farmers have no practice and no direct exposure to agroforestry practices in their vicinity. They only know that their grandfather may have had agroforestry on their farm, and the knowledge is not there. They don't know that agroforestry systems exist which can be highly profitable and can carry lots of benefits. One problem related to complexity is that it requires knowledge, which farmers may not get from their university education still. So we need to do a lot, and we will also work in our project to work with colleagues from Imatea to help farmers get some exposure to the topic and master some of the skills that are needed. And then we've got also market problems, of course. And this is just the perceived lack of market or market information has sometimes been clear. And policymakers, maybe researchers as well, can do a lot in order to contribute here. And maybe just to illustrate, scientific evidence on why do farmers practice or some other farmers do not practice agroforestry is not conclusive. We've done a publication on investigating, in a systematic review, the factors that have been identified as contributing to adoption or preventing adoption. And just to take the example of age, you see you have a number of studies which give significant negative relationship of age, and some studies give significant positive relationship of age. So age doesn't explain anything. Yeah? It depends again on the context, whether or not there are alternatives available to farmer, which one, how profitable they are, what type of knowledge, what type of farming system, what type of farm size, and so on and so on. All of this is necessary to understand. So, like just looking at it from 1,000 feet high doesn't help us. Yeah? And I'd like to just pick one of the factors, land tenure. As I told you, I've been working on land tenure probably already since I was a master's student. The situation in Europe is that many farmers don't own their farm. They just own a small 30-hectare farm, and then they rent 70 hectares of land from other people who have stopped their own farm operations. Now, even if this one farmer that I'm talking of with the 30 hectares is an educated and innovative farmer, and he wants to establish agroforestry, he cannot 100 hectares, he can maybe do it on 30. Yeah? But the landlord, like the person that he rents the land from, doesn't want to have trees on their farm. Because by law, once you have planted trees, it's forest, it's no longer an arable farm. So the person would not be able to rent it out as agricultural land. Yeah? So we have a lot of institutional problems here. And the problem does not only exist in Europe, it also exists in large parts of the US, for example. And interestingly, with this increasing awareness that agroforestry practices are useful and necessary, some communities, some farmers have started to experiment with some innovative arrangements. How can this relationship between the landlord and the farmer be kind of changed such that both of them have an incentive to practice agroforestry or to allow agroforestry on the land? Yeah? And just one example which they have developed is the cost share arrangement. Yeah? The farmer might want to have specific trees on a farm in an agroforestry arrangement because maybe it gives very specific fruits like an old apple variety or something like this. But the seeds or the seedlings of this species are very expensive, so the landlord doesn't have an interest to invest. Doesn't to pay for these trees. However, the benefits of the trees on the land are reaped by the farmer who owns the land, because the soil will be less eroded, there will be biodiversity benefits and so on. So what we need to come to maybe to solve this lock-in is that both parties contributes to the investment. Yeah? The farmer who wants to reap the fruits and sell them at the market will pay the cost of the seedlings that go beyond this, like any tree seedling. Yeah? The price of the seedling of a specific variety might be higher than of, let's say, a random tree, and this price difference needs to be paid by the farmer, while the socket basically will be paid by the farmer or by the person who owns the land. So this can be a solution, yeah? And it has been tried out, and apparently it was found working under specific conditions. Another solution that could also work out, now this is an example from Cameroon, where a colleague of mine and I investigated a very specific situation, cocoa agroforestry. in a situation where the trees on the farm belong to someone else than the cocoa orchard, the land. Similar to what I just described before. The reason why it is like that was different though. This was due to inheritance law. The farmer who owned the cocoa orchard with some trees in it passed away, and because this is a very densely populated area, he decided, and this is actually not just one case, but many cases in this region, the land with the cocoa trees go to one of my sons, and the trees which produce some fruits will go to the other son, and the one who owns the trees can sell the fruits, and the other one needs to sell the cocoa. Yeah? Under these conditions, if you want to establish new trees on a cocoa orchard, it's impossible. Yeah? Because the person who owns the cocoa orchard says, I don't want to have trees in my orchard because my cocoa yield will go down. And the other person doesn't own the land in order to plant trees. Of course, they would like to because they can sell their fruit if they have more trees. And the solution here is a simple crop share arrangement. Yeah? We have modeled basically what type of, which percentage of the revenues need to go to the farmer who owns the land, at which price of the of the cocoa for which of the agroforestry systems that exist there. Yeah? So these types of things can be done. I mean, that's just an illustration. But we need to understand what are the concrete bottlenecks in a given situation that prevent farmers from planting trees or allowing others to plant trees on their farm. Yeah? And then, but this is maybe just an illustration again. Of course, there are publications that report many other good examples of how the bottlenecks for agroforestry adoption can be removed in the various parts of the system. In the input system, where farmers sometimes complain they don't have access to high-quality seedlings, they don't have access to finance, they don't have access to land or land rights, etc., or in the production stage when it comes to knowledge and technical information that is required, or to the markets that are required, etc., and then the output stage as well. So examples exist, what type of interventions are required to solve these problems, yeah, from many different places. I don't want to go into the details here, but I think with some of our project work, we also want to contribute to this, payment for environmental services, like the carbon stored by the trees can be sold in the carbon market, the credits farmers will earn, and this will increase the profitability of the system and add motivation for farmers to plant trees on their farm. Yeah? Okay, I'd like to end with a few propositions. I don't know if they make sense, we can discuss them if you want. So the first point, I think very clear, the diversity of agroforestry systems requires location and context-specific analysis. You can only conclude for a specific condition, and it's difficult to compare without understanding the full context. And in fact, I think we need to make a step ahead in science as well. We need to be more clear about the conditions. We need to more clearly document also the conditions in order to be able to draw meaningful conclusions across cases. That's, I think, a problem at the moment. We have a lot of cases reporting what works in one condition, but it's difficult to replicate it elsewhere because of the very specific conditions, which cannot always be clearly described. The second proposition, I think, is also clear. Socioeconomic and environmental benefits of agroforestry systems are currently not, or at least not fully, rewarded or appreciated by the market. And this is why in our project we push into this direction. We'd like to understand what are these benefits and how can they be monetized for farmers to translate them into financial benefits. These benefits can be valorized by new products. This is what the example of the baobab tree, but many other examples, of course, Pipi and Baru and so on here from the region exist. By sustainability certification, many of the producers do this already, requesting higher prices from their consumers for the benefits they guarantee to the producers, or the carbon credits. These are just three examples how this can work. Yeah? Many other examples exist as well. Adoption of agroforestry systems can be improved by designing the system for socioeconomic rather than environmental benefits only. We just had a discussion on this during the last days. In the past, many agronomists have just looked at the environmental side of the system without fully understanding what do farmers need and how can we change how can we tip their decision into adopting, given the benefits they can derive from them for their nutrition or for their income, etc. Encouraging agroforestry adoption requires joint efforts by several stakeholders, not just scientists or the farmers, but also the market participants, policymakers, the extension system, all of them need to work together. And finally, the net effect of promoting agroforestry on saving the world, as I call it, is mediated by the rebound effect. And I don't dare to conclude on this point, to be honest. I think it requires much deeper thinking and much more analysis. With this, I stop and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
If you allow. Boa tarde, pessoal do vídeo.
Eu tenho uma pergunta.
Eu só vou falar aqui também, que tem um pessoal assistindo no YouTube e aqui na coisa, que eles têm questões também. Então, só para deixar claro aqui para quem está assistindo na plataforma Teams, né, e no YouTube, a gente está aberto aqui uma sessão de rápida discussão, depois no final a gente retorna, né? Então, quem quiser fazer questões aí também, depois da Maria, pode falar que a gente está ouvindo vocês aqui, tá? I'm just saying that people watching us on YouTube platform and also asking telephone, so they have questions to ask us.
They are much more advanced than we are.
Yes, we are.
Yes. A minha questão é, talvez os colegas do Pós-graduação brasileiro e até o Agrícola, não sei se poderia. Na Alemanha a gente realmente tem esse problema de, esse problema da legislação ser muito forte em relação à proteção das florestas, então os sistemas agroflorestais eles acabam não sendo implementados. Mas seria esse um problema do Brasil também ou não? Não.
Teria que plantar a árvore e poder escolher ela depois.
Assim, se você plantar a árvore...
Não, eu acho que você plantar a árvore que não protegir, né? Não, acho que não. Depende da espécie.
Código florestal, essas pessoas podem reduzir a floresta, a área florestal. Então, tem uma condição de
varia da legislação de estado para estado, eles estão dando expressão vegetativa, principalmente intervenção em áreas de apetite, que é vedado pelo Código Florestal, né?
Mas área privada.
E mesmo assim é vedado. Tem que ter área de apetite, área de não pode ter intervenção ambiental, desde que varia de estado para estado a questão do Código Florestal estadual. Tem o federal, mas o estadual que exige a respeito. Em área de apetite.
Mas, lá, o agricultor ele não vai ter um sistema florestal, porque eles podem, na verdade, a pessoa precisa mudar tanto o ambiente, que aquilo não vai ser mais uma área considerada, vai virar uma área considerada de floresta, e aí ele se complica. Essa é a pergunta.
É variável porque a questão na questão da supressão legislativa, né? Os parlamentares liberais, principalmente da questão em área de apetite, a normativa do código, mesmo em área que tem de agricultura familiar, tem esse passivo ambiental da questão do uso consolidado. Você tem uma área de uso consolidado, você consegue trabalhar, mas você usa para intervenção ambiental, mesmo em áreas pequenas, tem tudo em processo, né? Plano de liberação,
E área de APP para só de área de APP
Então, assim, na prática, esse pequeno agricultor, ele teria incentivo de ter um funcionador florestal ou...
Muitas das vezes o produtor entra com a cara e a coragem, né? A legislação competente de cada área. Unidade de Minas Gerais é o competente direto. Muito demais.
Aqui alguns que podem colocar até X% da maneira que pode fazer, então isso é bem variável. Não estamos federal.
I think I just translate because I have made the question because we had a legislation in Germany, so that there is not a policy protection that the farmers will not be not up to, let's say, to have agroforestry because of the protection of the trees. And I asked if here was similar, if that would be also from the deal. And I said, of course, it depends from state to state. Every state has a very specific policy. But there is a way, the college here, the college representative told me that there is a way that before you start with the agroforestry system, that you regulate that together with the that is the case, so that you can do it without fearing that the property is going to be converted somehow later on to a different kind of use that was before. But it's a quite complicated thing also here, as I've heard from the colleagues and all their colleagues. It's also not so 100% clear. It depends on kind of protection that's already in the area and so on, and depends from state to state. It varies much.
I have a question. I'd like to know the reference that you use for the results effect.
I can tell you the reference. I can tell you the reference.
Okay.
Right on the left.
All right. Tem algum lugar que dá para acertar o conteúdo? Vai ficar, eles vão deixar as apresentações comigo e vai ficar um vídeo gravado no YouTube e aí na plataforma eu estou gravando também. Então, vai ter várias escolhas.
Muito high-tech.
Do you have access to our presentations to ask me
Yes, I do. Yes, I would like to.
or also the recording computer, or then also the YouTube recording as well. So, o pessoal de Viçosa tem perguntas?
Tem não, pode ser. Tem não.
Que bom ouvir sua voz, rapaz. Professor Carlos, satisfação, Carlos. Obrigado. Bom, se vocês não têm questão, a gente está sequência. Então, there is no any more questions for a while at least. We'll return later. So, let's go on to the next. So, is it PowerPoint presentation or PowerPoint not 11? So,
Yeah, what's good?
which one is?
I can't see what are they? Here, follow that one.
No, is gone already. Fine.
Okay.
Ah, sì.
Because
brilliant. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah. Hi. Good afternoon from my side as well. As you already mentioned, I'm going to deep dive into a specific case study where I have done my research on, specifically in the battery in sub-Saharan Africa, and I want to specifically focus on the export market, how this has developed in the last 10, 20 years. Oops. I need to... I'll just reuse that one. Oh, okay. So I'm not sure how well known the baobab tree is here in Brazil. It's quite a famous, unique tree. It can go very high, very old, and it's got a very unique appearance. It makes it very famous as well. And but it's also really one of the most important indigenous food trees in sub-Saharan Africa, and a lot of it's very important for socioeconomic effects, especially food security and tranquility of people who live around these trees. So here you can see where it's located. So there's a map of the African continent, and it's mainly distributed in the very dry areas of sub-Saharan Africa. So it's very arid, not too much rain. And which is also an opportunity as well, because by utilizing the fruits for the tree in itself, people can gain food as well as one of an income opportunity. And it's in areas when there's often not many other opportunities as well. So it can create a win-win situation. And also, this is also fostered by the tree is cannot be used for timber, for example. So often in many countries, all the trees, the forests are being cut down, but often they leave the baobab there for its value, and also because it cannot be used for construction, and it's also not very good for firewood or something. Here are some of the uses in this picture. This picture already showed a few before, so these are how things are used on local markets. I mean, this is really different depending on which country you are in Western Africa or in Eastern Africa. But overall, the whole tree basically can be used. So you can use the leaves, you can use the bark, and the fruit as well, which I'll be focusing on later. But yeah, it really depends where you are. And we focus our research on the eastern part, in Eastern Africa, with generally the usage is a bit lower than in other parts. So in Western Africa and Southern Africa, people use a little bit more. So here I wanted to show you what all has been done or can be done from baobab. So you have the tree right on the left, and you can use the leaves. You can use the leaves for food. Some also there's medical properties. You have the bark, which you can use for handicraft or to make rope. A rope or clothes even, and then you have the fruits, which is the most heavily utilized product. So that goes also. The shells can be used. Firewood basically. You have fibers in the fruits, which is being researched on now because they might also have some health properties. And then you've got the main product, the pulp and seeds. Whereas the seeds are then being used to make oil, which is really quite well known for cosmetics. So you find a lot more shampoos or oils and other cosmetic products. And then the powder, which is really used in a lot of different products, the juices, the sweets, other confectionaries. So. And the reason why this has really exploded in recent years is because it's got a really interesting nutrient profile. So it's really, it's got associated health benefits. So then it's most famous for being really rich in vitamin C. So you can see the open fruit here. And another special thing is that it's dry. When the fruit is ripe, the fruit pulp is actually dry. So it's really easy to make a powder from it. And you can add that very easily into different products. And there's studies to show it's got more vitamin C than oranges and everything, but it's also really interesting from other micronutrients, minerals, iron, calcium, and its fiber content as well. And that's why it offers a lot of possibilities to contribute to food security as well. So you can either add it to bread or to whatever and fight malnutrition, especially because it grows in these areas where other plants have troubles. This overall has sparked really more interest in this tree and this fruit, and the demand is really growing in recent years. So it's not also on a local level as well, but also on the international level. And it really has fostered an export market in the last 20 years, and mainly also because it was accepted as a novel food in 2008 for Europe and the US market. So before that time, it wasn't allowed to be exported from Africa. It had to go through a big process. And since then, the market has really gradually taken off. And now we find more and more products also on the European and US market. So here you see some examples. So you also find juices, within yogurts and chocolate. And on the bottom there, you can also see different cosmetic products, so in lotion, in shampoo, etc. So, that all happened in less than 20 years. So the question I wanted to tackle in my research was then how for these things to happen, this is often promoted. Non-synthesized products, we see they're healthy, we see they have benefits such as we could use the value addition as an income opportunity, but it doesn't really often take off. So some interventions take off, some others do not, and there's still a lot of potential. And I wanted to really understand what triggered this baobab. So the case of baobab, what was important, what first really created this jump to make it from an informally used product to this export industry. What were the key factors involved? As my conceptual framework based on the concept idea of innovation, got there like a definition of innovation there, like the process for how new improved products, services can emerge in order to advance, compete and differentiate themselves in the marketplace. And in order to stand innovation better, the concept of the innovation system has evolved, which aims to understand why and how these innovations occur. And it reflects on, it goes on seeing and analyzing all the different actors involved in the system. So who is involved, how do they relate to each other, and which institutions is important. And this can be mapped on different levels. For example, you can look at a national system. So what actors, who is important on a national level to foster innovations, or on a regional level, but also on a technological or product-related level, which I used as a basis in my case studies, which I get the actors and institutions acting in a specific technological field, which facilitated the development of these new products. And furthermore, there are different functions involved, which help us to understand how the system is performing. So you can see this better in this graph, which illustrates this. So in the middle, you have the different actors involved, the institutions, the product in question, and outside are these functions. So what important, for instance, resource mobilization is important, entrepreneurs are important, knowledge development is important, and in total there are usually 6-7 factors which are usually taken into consideration. And over time this can change. The role of these different functions can change over time. So with this basis in mind, I wanted to understand what happened in the baobab world, and because there are not many people really exporting in baobab to Europe and the US, I use the qualitative approach. I think there are about 10-12 people really exporting baobab into these international markets. So I interviewed them and other people who were involved in the sector, like some development agencies, and also some brands or people who are importing in these countries. And before I did 2 rounds of interviews, basically then along this framework which I showed earlier. And then the later was the interviews which I tried and analyzed to see really analyze which factors contribute to this sector development. So I'll just show you some of the results. So basically just to recap how the sector developed. So 20, 30 years ago there was nothing. It was just informally used mainly in the different countries. And then it started in the late 90s, early 2000s, where the interest in this species grew. And it started first in Senegal and in southern Africa, especially Malawi. Then we had in 2008 this novel food approval, which really actually gave the basis to the export market. And then from 2010, the demand started slowly to rise. And now it's about 700 tons, which is being exported from sub-Saharan Africa. And a few years ago, when the project involved as well, there was an alliance built by the different producers and also importers and brands to help grow this demand for sustainably produced baobabs. I tried to summarize the main innovations which happened in the meantime to build this sector, and they come from the different innovation types. So there were a lot of products being developed in the meantime, especially in the healthy food segment, also sports drinks and bar smoothies. But also the processes really had to change. So we used to have this very simple technology to process. So there were a lot of innovations with regard to the machines we used to process the fruit and to store the fruit. So this was all knowledge which was not previously available, so that all had to be developed first. And then especially most important were the organization and innovation. So to make sure to reach the quality for the export market, how the supply chain is organized, everything had to change. So you couldn't just crack the fruits open and sell it, but you really had to change the structure, to set up central processing facilities to assure the hygiene, etc., which is needed. And there are also different, how the enterprises are organized. There were also some shifts. So some are trying to have some shareholding structures to really involve also the harvesters. On marketing, there were also very brands on the European side. They were really trying to do something differently to raise their demand, because it was a known product in Europe at first. So they really pushed a lot and put most of the resources they had into marketing to stimulate their demand. So there were also quite some innovations there. And then now, coming back to these functions I mentioned earlier, so these were the main, the most important things which contributed to building the sector. So in the middle you see the different actors which are involved. So in the early beginnings it was mainly entrepreneurs who often came from the development world and saw this opportunity, supported by an advocacy group, which was again supported by development organizations. And they were mainly positive. The main functions were important were resource mobilization, really to get funds going into the sector, to get, for example, this novel food approval, which got $100,000, I think, and a lot of other knowledge. The knowledge which had to be generated. So you needed the resources, the knowledge development to get the information on the health effects, on how to process baobab, etc. So these were the main factors, and then of course also the entrepreneurs, and to get the legitimization to actually be able to sell on the market. And after after the approval was obtained, it shifted a little bit, but gaining further knowledge on the resource is still important, and the entrepreneurial activities are also still important, but now it shifts more on the end of the value chain, where really we get more into the product development of novel products. So there's more happening there at that time, and there's more activities on the market formation right now. So here, I think the time there's more details on on the different on these different functions in depth. But I feel to get the presentation later. I can skip through these now for now. So there were many. I mean, it was just overall there was just many factors which influenced this industry. Then I also looked a little bit into the aspects involving sustainability, because it is a wide resource, and it can, if you use it too much, you can always run into problems and run into over-exploitation, especially because it's all still comes from wild resources. You don't get to have power plantations, you don't have power fisheries and power agroforestry systems, but it's all either mostly on wild resource on farmlands. However, as of now, the export-oriented sector is quite targeted towards sustainability. So everything you find in Europe, US is organically certified, and they're not. It's also trade certified. Plus, they have also been involved in developing special standards for because it's a wild resource. So some are filed for wild resource. Fair wild certified. However, the people who really pushed, the pioneers, really people in the beginning, are quite worried at the moment that with the increasing demand now this might change. That other people will come on board, see there's a market in Bayerberg that's growing, and that these standards will become lower in future. So it's an ongoing process. What will happen? Just to conclude, as a Bayerberg did manage to jump over these many challenges mounted in the forest product space, and it was really heavily. It was a bottom-up approach. So from entrepreneurs, external agents pushing money into the system, and it was a lot of collaboration between different factors on the global in African countries, but also in the global north, which had to really, which generated the knowledge needed to change the supply chain, to get the quality right, to be able to sell it in these export markets. And moving on, the sector will probably not yet self-sufficient, so it probably still needs some support to develop, especially in a way to keep it sustainable. So the resource should still need to be monitored, to see if it's going into the right direction. So I think with that I'd like to conclude, and if you want to find out some more about the bigger project, this was just a small part, you can find those on our project website, if you want to dig in deeper into the Bayerberg. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'd like to know what the appearance of bulb are in the region. How many trees by hectare?
That depends very much on the location. I'm not sure.
Where they produce products from bulb? What kind of conditions from bulb?
It can be in, I know Malawi and Kenya best where our research was going, and they find areas with very high density, and other areas where there's a few trees per hectare. In Malawi, there's at Lake Malawi, there's very high density in Kenya we have high density at the coast, but also inland it's very different. It's often you often have either high density or low density.
da importante o valor de produção, de valor da festival de renda, não tem nenhum dado prestativo, análise qualitativa também.
They have data, production data. So they were saying that from the for the value chain, so the value chain of this product.
Some data, it was also quite difficult because it's very a few producers who all know each other. It was quite difficult to get the details out. I have some, and they, especially from the southern African regions, they quite work together quite closely to get really, they're very specific on their costs. It's quite difficult.
Ela tem algum tipo de dados, mas dados específicos de custos são muito difíceis, porque são produtores pequenos e eles não queiram dar os dados.
But the overall volume, there's some data.
Existe alguns tipos de dados. Total.
But I guess with those data for all these regions, not the first, yeah?
Yes, some also in some, some other working groups within the project worked also, or within certain regions to see how the local market.
Existe alguns dados, né? Maybe, se você estiver interessado, você pode dar o pedido para ela e eu preciso para your email and you can forward it.
Comparing the innovation process, like the innovation, they are happening especially for international market. I'd like to know if the new products in the international market are implementing the local producers, the local chains to innovate as well, to design new products, also if the demand for the international market is the access to local consumers, to the outlet
again, the situation depends very much where you are. One of the reasons people started or put so much effort in the baobab was because in the beginning it was in Malawi or in Zimbabwe, South Africa, not used very much at all. The fruit were often falling on the ground and not used, which sparked this interest also. We can do something with this. We will not take something away. But now this is also changing again. Now it's becoming more popular. And actually, some of the people I interviewed, in hindsight, were very critical. They said, "Oh, we should have focused more on the local market first, because it's cheaper to do it that way." And now, actually, these producers are, because the international market is difficult, you have to reach the quality requirements, very expensive, and they're actually now putting much more resources into the local market, and there's a lot more product development going in. I've seen with pictures from Malawi and also Zimbabwe, there's so much more going into there, and people are getting, it's not how the fruits are lying there, it's food, now they're starting to value it more. So we have also seen that, which I think is a really nice development. Yeah.
Pessoal de salas aí, alguma questão? Certo?
Tranquilo, não.
Você tem?
Oi?
Não tem?
Não temos.
Vou tocar e depois no final vocês podem retomar o seu caso, tá? So they have no question for a while, and let's see at the end of this. So,
If you can help me find
yeah. I think yours, I know.
It's at the very end. This is the
This is not right.
It's a real PowerPoint. So
Yeah, that helps a lot. Right. So I think you have to answer.
This is what I did. Okay. I hope you are still enough energy level high enough for the last presentation.
No, the thing is that I still have You know our presentation. So they still have to order for
Oh, wow, sorry.
drink more coffee.
Okay.
No, that's okay.
Okay. So after deep diving with Catherine, I'll take you up to the surface with a very general presentation. That would also, Catherine took you to Africa, I will take you to Asia, because that's by way of introduction. I only want to say I'm a geographer, so I'm used to rather broad approaches. And also, this is my first visit not only to Brazil, but also to Latin America, a very new environment for me. 40 years of my working life working on Asia and in Asia, mostly Nepal and Thailand and China. So my presentation, forest and trees in the rural tropics, should have added on mostly in Asia. So I guess that this is my hope, and I'm also very grateful to Dietrich, the other Dietrich, for inviting me to this project, which will provide me with a sort of the opportunity to get out of my niche and get some comparative knowledge by learning more about how things are working in your environment, in your context. So what I would like to do is, under this headline, show you very broadly, first of all, sort of a change of thinking that provides also the background for agroforestry, for hopefully the success of agroforestry. And I would like also to put agroforestry into the context, into a larger context of land use change. Now, Dietrich has already pointed out the connection. He said maybe agroforestry could be a way out of this succession of land use changing from one type to another type. I would like to show you examples of how land use change can have negative impacts on agroforestry, but also how land use change may provide an opportunity for agroforestry systems to be promoted. And that's basically how I want that to end on a positive note. But let's first go to the change of thinking. Now that is from a European perspective. And that's been something to Europe. After the war, 1960s, 70s, development policies was quite an important thing, development aid to developing countries. That was dominated for a long time by the agricultural sector. So a lot of thinking went into how can we improve agricultural production. The big problems were food insecurity, famine, poverty. That was for a long time seen mainly as a problem of low agricultural productivity. Trees and forests were not so very much in the focus of this early stage of development policy. And that changed in the 1970s. 1970s is an incredibly important decade. I was in my 20s around that time, and so I'm a little bit part of also watching this. And very, very important was that at this time then it was understood, maybe this focus on agriculture was maybe not the right path. One example for this focus on agriculture was the Green Revolution, which played an important role in Asia, for instance. It started in Asia, and with the research in the Philippines, development of high-yielding varieties, but it was recognized after some time that this focus on high-yielding varieties, often in monocultures, was not so very good for the environment, but maybe also not so very good for the smallholders. So that started a change of thinking that led to an insight that this food production-oriented early development may not have benefited the smallholders. Another thing happened in the 1970s, that is that tropical deforestation became a big topic. And that was already at that time centered very much on Latin America and the Amazon. It's not kind of refocusing on this region, even though there are also other bad examples. So these were kind of the problems. Maybe focus on agricultural production is not the sole issue. Tropical deforestation is a big problem. Two types of solutions were at that time in the 1970s defined. One was a policy approach, community-based forest management. Again, that is something that started very much in Asia. Community forestry, joint forest management. I will not say much about that. And then focus on the other important development. Promotion of agroforestry systems. That is, again, agroforestry systems, as you all know, can have a very long tradition in many countries. But as a kind of a policy approach that started in the 1970s. And in both cases, FAO was very important, World Bank was very important. So it was something that was also driven by big organizations. Agroforestry systems here, I would like to add on to what Dietrich said, was in the beginning very much viewed from a farm perspective. What can you do on the land management unit? I mean, you show these examples, crops underneath trees, roots that pull up the nutrients. But you can also view agroforestry relations on a landscape scale. And that is something I'll show an example from my own work, but it's also something to keep in mind. As you can see, agroforestry is about interaction. It's about the interrelations between trees, forests, crops, and animals that can happen on a farm scale, that can happen on a large landscape scale. And community-based forestry, I just want to touch it because it's not going to play a big role in what I'm going to say. It's the thinking that management of forests should not only be centralized. You can say, especially in what these then called developing countries, was very much the prerogative of ministries of forests and so on. And the idea was that forest management should be more a cooperation between government agencies, organizations, and especially local communities. I just mention it because it is kind of part of the change of thinking. I don't need to say much more about agroforestry because Dietrich mentioned most of it. Maybe just show you a few exotic or less for you maybe exotic examples of agroforestry. That is one from China where I spent about 6 years, and that is from southern China, which is quite tropical. And you can see here rice fields, irrigated rice. Quite obviously, trees also play a role. So we have an agroforestry system. But quite interesting, there's another very important component, and that is water. Visible water in the form of ponds, and to the observer, invisible water. And that is the water on the terraces, because rice is irrigated, of course. And in China, they've developed very intricate systems of also keeping fish and other animals with the rice fields. So you have an added source of food or added source of products that you can sell. But there's also research that has shown that the presence of fish in rice fields can increase the yield of rice. That's not our topic, but just to show you that, especially also in Asia, you can, with a long tradition, this is an indigenous system that has been developed by a minority in the southwest of China. So there's a lot that you can learn there. Now, Germany, that is for me not so exotic, especially this is taken right behind my house near Freiburg. And here I would like to add on to what Dietrich said, that in Germany, we have a history of kind of agroforestry systems fading out. We have a strong tradition of agroforestry systems, which then kind of were replaced by more and more intensive systems over time. Now there's a bit of a reversal, and I've seen that really at the back of my house. I can say, first of all, this is a very simple agroforestry system. It's a silvopastoris system. It's called the meadow orchard. And the main components are fruit trees, in this case cherry. The other component is livestock, and the other component is a pasture, a meadow. And you can see the benefits quite obviously, sort of the mutual relations. Animals are benefiting from the shade, and the trees are benefiting from the manure that's brought by the cows. The interesting thing is, now this is behind my house. Since 10 years now, they're driving the cattle onto this product. So it's a kind of a revival an old traditional agroforestry system, which is driven by policy change. It's also driven by a change of priorities, because this is not really an economic system. So if a farmer would earn a lot more money by putting more fruit trees or by maybe just using the pasture, but now you can get subsidies for managing land like this, because it's better for biodiversity, it's better for conservation. So the change of focus to conservation has provided is kind of the driving force for the revival of agroforestry, which just also shows that, adding on to what Dietrich said, of course, it's important to focus on market forces, so that it becomes interesting for farmers to practice these systems. But don't forget the policy making. That is also, it needs policies to drive these changes. That's now, that was still looking at farm units. And I mentioned also that agroforestry relations, the interactions between trees, crops, and animals can play out over large landscapes. Now I've done a lot of my research in the Himalayas of Nepal, and that is a typical agricultural or cultural landscape. You can see terraces, that's dry season now, so it's looks like here, more or less, at the same time. And then you see small patches of forest and individual trees. Now, how is that interrelated? Just very briefly, there are two types of farmland. There is the irrigated rice that we've seen at the image out in China. Then there are terraces that are only rain-fed, where farmers grow corn or millet or other grains. And then, of course, you have forest, you have grassland, and you have a very important element that connects all these units, and that's livestock. Livestock, the problem is what you don't see on this image are expensive grassland. So where do the animals get their fodder from? Some is grass. Quite important are also crop recipients, what's left over after the harvest. But very important is tree fodder. Now that's leaves that are cut from the trees, mostly from the forest, and that are then fed to the animals, and the animals produce manure that goes to both types of agricultural land. So it's, in this sense, a large area, but we do have an agroforestry interrelationship. Livestock is kind of the connecting point between forest and farmland, a connecting point that transports nutrients from forest to farmland. So that's just also to mention this dimension of agroforestry systems. Now this is a presentation that I give to a German audience, so I'm sometimes saying things that to you are absolutely clear. Tropical rural landscapes, in tropical rural landscapes, forest and farmland are not as clearly segregated as, for instance, in Germany, where the policies of the government were very much driven at also kind of abolishing farmers' rights of using products from the forest. The idea was really forests are for the forestry department and farmland are for the farmers. And interactions between one and the other, as we still see them in many tropical countries, actually were discouraged over a long time. But in tropical landscapes, we have these various functional interrelationships between forests and farms, as I've just shown in the Himalayas, and trees are an integral component of land use systems, some of them which are quite specific for tropical areas. And I would like to just show one of them that I've been working on for about 30 years again in an Asian context. And that's the system of shifting cultivation. I think around here you mostly use the term slash and burn. I think you mentioned it also today in our discussion. Slash and burn, as I understand it, is very much a practice here. expanding cropland into forest land. But in Asia, and I think also in the Amazon, it's actually slash and burn is part of a land use system. So that I think I see a lot of nodding of your head, so I don't need to go into too much detail here. So, and this that's a photograph of that I took in Thailand that shows the shifting cultivation landscape. Maybe I don't know whether it's similar to what you see here in the Amazon. It's very typical for Southeast Asia. Here you see a plot of land that has been cleared as the trees have been cut, and the trees and the leaves have been burned. Then there has been 1 year of cultivation, rice in this space. After that, this plot of land was abandoned. There is regrowth, and regrowth that gradually grows into forest, into over several successions of secondary forests. So it's a type of temporary land use that maintains forest cover in a kind of dynamic equilibrium. And this is shown again here. So many of these, we call them swing systems. There are many terms, but don't be confused by that. Sometimes I think of shifting cultivation, sometimes it's swing. But many of the systems in Southeast Asia are really rotational. There is the felling and the burning, and the clearing of the patch. There's the planting, there's the cultivation period, and then a long period of what is called fallow, where the land is left to itself, ideally not shorter than 10 years. That's about the time that a secondary forest needs to get established. And then we have a forest patch, which after 10 years or so is felled again. And so it goes through this rotation. What's quite important is that these circuits, also, think again, landscape scale, these rotations happen within a village, but also over a larger landscape scale. I took this photograph flying over Laos. You can see that during the dry season, you can see really this patchy landscape. It's a very diverse mosaic type of landscape. This is just the recently cleared area, and from the distance difficult to see. Light green, that's the early succession, the young shrubs. Dark green, the secondary forests. So it's a very dynamic, and rather diverse landscape, and in which forests play an important role. It's also an agroforestry system, but in a different way. There are agroforestry systems where trees and crops sort of interact or are interrelated on the same plot of land at the same time. In shifting cultivation, it's in a kind of sequence. Trees and forests follow up on crops. And during the time of the fallow, land regenerates, biomass is accumulated. And then when the forests are burned again, then biomass is mineralized, the nutrients are returned to the soil, and that is interrelation. But it's still an agroforestry system. And the forests, well, this is just going back to a bit of my own research from a long time ago, and a little bit less long time ago, also with Thai colleagues. We looked into the quality of the secondary forests that were regenerated in the system. And this again shows the cycle. Bright green, that is the area that was taken during the rainy season, that is rice. So that is a rice field in the middle of the forest. In the foreground, a fallow area after 2 years, sort of covered mainly by shrub and regrowing trees. And this is a 12-year-old fallow forest, secondary forest. That's about the time when they start cutting it again, and the whole cycle starts. And what's actually impressive to say is that all of this landscape has gone through these cycles. So this is no longer natural forest, but it's forest, and it does have some positive aspects. Now, we looked into biodiversity. That's 500 square meters. We counted 30 different species only in the tree area. It's almost similar to the species richness in a neighboring forest, which was 92 species here, 98 in the 6-year-old fallow. So it's not to say that this is the same quality as a primary forest, but it still provides ecosystem services. So it's something quite valuable. Yeah, that is just shifting cultivation as a traditional agroforestry system that used to be quite widespread and important in tropical areas, especially in Southeast Asia. But what I would like to show in my next slide is now that we are now in a process of land use change. The traditional land uses change into modern land uses. And the role that agroforestry can play in these changes, that is something that I personally find very interesting. And that could also be of importance in our project here. Now, these land use changes, I'll introduce a few terms here with which you're probably already quite familiar, play out along agricultural forest frontiers. That's kind of not border lines, but border areas. It can be quite broad, which are very active, where you have forest on the one hand, farmland on the other hand, and it's changing. Mostly, farmland encroaches upon forests. I think that's what I understand about your part of the world. That's really what still mainly happens here in the form of colonization. But it can also go the other way around. Forest can be planted. It can be restored, or it can expand more or less through natural processes onto abandoned farmland. And there is we can put this into a framework, and that is the so-called forest transition curve. I don't know to what extent whether you've heard about that yet. It's a framework that has been developed by a geographer, Mr. Mather, in 1992, and that basically postulates that in most countries we have a curve that starts at a period when forests are largely undisturbed. Then it dips when forest gets increasingly disturbed or cleared. So it goes down and down and down. There's a stage that is called frontier forests. That's the stage when forests are really sort of pushed back by agricultural expansion. Where we have a mosaic, some residual forest, mostly agricultural land. And then there is something like a turning point. It's not something, deforestation doesn't go on forever. There's a turning point where forest cover is restored, but mostly through forest plantation activities or conservation, various, and then it kind of goes up again. And here, that's a little bit outdated. Figure, it puts some regions now here along this curve, and I think the Amazon basin will probably be a little bit more lower down in the area of loss of forest cover. And here, China would be somewhere here. And in the next slides, I would like to show you a few the development from here to there, from a forest agriculture mosaic, from a mosaic of, we can say, still more or less natural forest and farmland to an increasing amount of plantation forest. And that is, don't want to really spend too much time on that. I mentioned that shifting cultivation has been an important traditional land use in the tropics. In Southeast Asia, that has ended in the 1960s, 70s. And after the 1970s, other land uses took the place of shifting cultivation. And that's and this map shows how different that can be in different parts of Southeast Asia. Just a few photographs to show these differences. That is an area in Thailand where the change from shifting cultivation to permanent farming has just happened. You can still see the typical structure of a shifting cultivation landscape with patches of forest and in between patches of agricultural land. So that's the classical mosaic that we could see on this previous image. The crop here is cabbage. But then we can see two other trajectories. North of Vietnam, that's where shifting cultivation changed into permanent cropping with maize. So that's maize monocultures. And that's China. And here the change was from shifting cultivation to rubber plantation. Your contribution to the world, but now the main rubber production is no longer in Brazil, but it's in Latin America, but it's in Asia. 90% of the rubber production is in Asia, led by Thailand, but China also has some. And we've seen some massive changes here from shifting cultivation to these plantations of rubber. So that again, that's sort of then the other end of the curve. You can see forest cover is increasing again, but it's not a natural forest, it's not a secondary forest, it's a plantation forest. And so yeah, this just to illustrate this massive change. Now, that is still that is in the southern part of China, province of Yunnan, a traditional landscape, many different components. There's here irrigated rice. There is there's maize. There are other grain growing areas. This is regrowth, secondary regrowth, and these are forest patches that have been left. Overall, there's actually secondary forest. But in most part of Yunnan, this relatively diverse landscape has been changed into a very homogeneous landscape. So you basically have two units. In the areas where irrigation is possible, you still have a little bit of rice, but mostly also things that can be exported, like banana. And the slopes of the mountains totally covered in rubber trees. It's an amazing change in the landscape that while I was working in China, we have tried to document here through remote sensing data. And this is where we are. That's a small administrative unit, Xishuangbanna. It's bordering upon Myanmar, Burma, and Laos. Here's Vietnam, here's Thailand. And you can see in 1988, the area covered by rubber plantations was 4%. In 2002, it was already 10%. In 2010, it was more than 20%. And that's absolutely amazing. Change, land use change over a short time and over a massively large area. And this change basically happened in two ways. It was either, what I have to add, this is not government. It was in the beginning government driven. But then when it really started to take over by smallholders. Smallholders learned that you can earn a lot of money, and they really bought into this change. So here, most of the expansion of rubber happened on former agricultural land. That is a village in 2000. The gray area is the rotational crop. It's another word for shifting cultivation. That's really what it is, rotation. And now, about 12 years later, completely converted to rubber. That's really almost 100%. And another way was really rubber replacing forest. And that's what you can see quite nicely on this photograph. That is a natural forest. That is a young, sort of a newly established rubber plantation. That is a mature, closed rubber plantation. And this is land, if you get close enough, you can see the stumps of the trees that have been cut down. So that's going to be changed into rubber plantations relatively soon. So rubber plantation expanded both at the cost of traditional land use and at the cost of natural forest cover. Yeah, quite a questionable development if from various perspectives, especially if you think, of course, from biodiversity perspective, it's quite questionable, but also livelihoods. If farmers now place almost all of their existence on one crop now, what happens now if diseases start? What happens when prices drop? What happens? And that's the next slide, or almost the next slide. But here I would just want to quite quickly intervene and say that now this is really a nice illustration of a forest transition. Where it was sort of, in the beginning, there were probably somewhere in the past there was the natural forest, through shifting cultivation that has changed into a mosaic of secondary forest and agricultural land. Now, after the turning point, shifting cultivation was replaced by plantations. So secondary forest and farmland was replaced by plantation forest. And according to the model of forest transition, this is how it goes. No? And there's always only one direction. But there's another model which I actually prefer, and it's the so-called pendulum framework that says, okay, this can happen. We are here, a lot of forest and little farmland. And then the pendulum swings to more farmland, less forest. And it swings to the other extreme, a lot of farmland and very little forest left. But then it also says the pendulum can swing back. There can be instances where, due to policy interventions, projects, or other initiatives, maybe there can be the change back to sort of less farmland and hopefully more forest land. And that is what almost happened now in the same area. In 2011 was the time when the rubber prices of the global market were highest. And after 2011, they dropped amazingly. And so for farmers, then suddenly rubber was no longer interesting. And so then there was another group that took our mapping exercise a little bit further into the year 2018. We could see rubber is red, always the increase, 10%, 22%, 24%. But then that was already 2014. In 2018, rubber has decreased, again by about 4%. Now, hopefully, according to the pendulum model, that would have been equal to the increase of forest cover. That has not happened. Forest cover has also continued to decrease. Farmland has decreased. The only thing that has increased is this yellow cover, shrubland, abandoned land. Right? And that is actually a process. I don't know anything about Latin America, but that's a process that we've seen here in China, that we see in many other parts of Asia. We are now just starting a project, again in the Himalaya, where in some areas, 30% of the agricultural land has been because of out-migration of farmers to other labor markets. What to do with this land? What happens to this land? You can see there is some sort of natural expansion of forests and trees get established. But I mean, there are other ways. These places can be managed. These areas can be managed. There could be an opportunity for agroforestry, just what Dietrich mentioned, to establish a land use system that serves so many purposes. Maybe you no longer need a pendulum sphere, but who knows, or a forest transition. But that is just, the main point was to show you the dynamic of this, in a larger scale in which we place our project, and which can be a danger, but it can be an opportunity. So, thank you for listening. One of us would have to sort of anon the
you mentioned, of course, lots of huge change. And you mentioned that it started mainly moved by government, by support by government, yeah?
Which
land use change.
Not well in this particular case. Let's say in the case of China, it was government policy to promote rubber plantation. There were reasons for that. But then actually that was really just the beginning. And after that, smallholders really took over very strongly, even to the point that the government got a little bit scared because rubber expanded into areas which were no longer suitable for rubber. And it was government started, but not entirely. It was government started, but at the end, market driven.
It's pretty much in Brazil. Sometimes it starts with government, and then they keep going down to
the other land use change that I mentioned. Now you know that the amendment of that. That's again market driven, but that's demography. It's our migration of labor to outside. Well, in Nepal, it's the young men who are going to Qatar and to the Middle East. They leave the land, stop farming, and they get their income from other sources. So it's very complex.
And during the pandemic, maybe some small farmers do not have support for public policies, technology, and capital.
This is something that we try to find out. Now, it looks very complicated.
Yes.
I mean, we think it's mostly poor farmers, because rich farmers, I mean, they can still send somebody outside, but they have money to maintain the land. But poor farmers, it can be very complex.
And you think depends on your work in a place like Cerrado, where farm size increase, it's not the big owners of big areas, big land, big land size, determining the movement of the depending. Now they are moving from pastures, as you saw, and it's amazing. I read that from paper, from published 3 or 4 years ago, and now you can see very fast in the last day of amazing how it's changed to monocrops.
That's what would be my...
Will depend on the growing series, I think, because the land is so good for monocrop. Because it's flat, like the plateaus, which are the flat, higher flat areas, that are perfect for agriculture. And then we have the lowlands, which are most the topography is more is not so good for agriculture. Then you have more like a combination of several.
That's my learning experience. That's no idea yet, because my examples are from Asia, those different contexts. But I've learned so far in those few days here. At the moment, we're still at this stage where in the first presentation of the it was so interesting how fast there was overtaken by cropland. Will that go on forever? So, at the moment, it does. But that's what we remember.
We have a big kind of comment. We'd like to know from usage about that. I see your view. I would like to speak pretty clear about that in our country. Children have, for instance, it was organic. If you have a land or you want to rent a land as well, you can do that. Improve for them, and they have like a prescription for cattle. And they give money for you, and then they raise cattle, and then they take the rent back and tell their father. You are not plant fighting. You can do as well. There's a prescription for planting fighting. You can do like others can do products or whatever, but anyway, if you have a prescription. But if you don't do out of the park, you can use home. The farmer must know about the germination, the management of one tree, another tree, or crop management. It has to know a cropping management, whatever. So there are a lot of things that are very complex world that is getting, and usually they do not have any support. I would say they have some support in Brazil. they don't have the same support of society that they, for farmers or ranchers or cattle ranchers as well. They have, if I hear from other countries, other experience that you might have, if they have better approach than we do for supporting the farmers and people that want to do kind of system, kind of management.
That was why I also mentioned community forestry as one of the big changes that came to the 1970s. One was agroforestry as a possible model that can combine both addressing environmental issues but also livelihood problems, and then community forestry, which gives more power to communities to decide what they want to do on the land for which they are responsible. So we could see in Nepal, for instance, where this policy was quite successful, but this has also gone hand in hand with an increase in agroforestry systems on community forestry land. So maybe that is something that has to be seen in connection. Again, coming back to the policy problem. But I mean, I just mentioned in Germany, it's just beginning. I mean, people pointed out the problems of farmers who cannot grow trees on their land. But then we see the beginnings now of a change of thinking in this small example of the meadow ranchers. But I would say it's not yet a large-scale improvement in Germany. I wouldn't really know any sort of really shining examples of countries that provide policy that's conducive to agroforestry. It's often a problem of terminology, and it's a problem also of prioritizing. And this distinction between agriculture and forestry, you cannot put trees because then becomes forest. So that would be a very important issue that policymakers accept the combination of trees, crops, or livestock.
Yeah, that's hard. What I meant is I think it's not only matter of profitability, there are other complexities that goes against the people that you have to learn to overcome these kind of difficulties that they are going to face. How to plant, how to harvest, how to get money from the bank, property to look to a bank, they won't get the same money, the same way that a cattle rancher got. Yes, I think that's very hard to do. For instance, we have like a governmental agency that gives extension or support for farmers. I don't think they do have a lot of agronomists that know better this kind of system than the other one. If you go to Embrapa, about 15, how many percent of Embrapa is oriented to soybean, cotton, those monocultures, and how much percent of the Embrapa is oriented to?
I don't know that. Well, Embrapa is technology is everything. Now it's moving out more and more commodities. Yeah. But there's a lot of space for innovation because it has so many units, so many that can be used in agriculture and forestry, including the credit from the farming.
I think the good thing, I don't want to kind of paint things too bright. Yeah? We are aware of the many problems, and the ones you described are the challenges a farmer meets when he or she wants to convert into agroforestry. It's not yet the level playing field. Of course, the system is promoting or is in favor of large-scale commercial agriculture of the old way, because this is what we have been teaching our professionals for the last 20 or 30 or 40 years in universities. But I think the change is noticeable. the UN Food System Summit, for example, or similar initiatives, they all indicate that like thinking about an alternative food system is ongoing, and it will take some more 20 or 30 years before it will really reach the level and practitioners change their practices, because it has to go all the way down through the policy levels and in the university system, and then the next or the second next generation of professionals will have the necessary knowledge and skills, and people in the banks will be open to alternative systems and so on. The big question is, do we have these 20 or 30 or 40 years before change can happen? And I think the project that we will work on, and many other projects of course as well, they try already to establish on the ground some good examples that can maybe convince people in the surrounding to think differently about the way how they do farming. And this is also important. Yeah, it needs both. It needs the policy level. Thank you for pointing this out again. It's very important. But it also needs action, concrete action on the ground. And I think as researchers, we are also obliged to contribute to this. We can do proper science and write nice articles, but if they don't change anything in reality, then this is useless. Yeah? So for this reason, we need to work together with the farmers and with the Ematia people and with the cooperative people and so on, and try to change things, at least a little. And generate the data. I don't know.
Very good for maybe for us, but not for everyone else. So I don't know. Again, all inclusive. Anyway, that's the stuff. But the last one on the race is about culture. Quite a simple rules. If you go anywhere in the Amazon, I can say that I live there. So it is fancy, it's passion to be a cowboy in the Amazon. So, and then to ride a horse, to have much of them culture as well. Anyway, that's fancy, passion. But if you're going to be like a farmer that are going to, I heard from our guy from Mato, but he said that, he has actually agriculture place in Mato Grosso, in the state of Mato Grosso, and he was saying the people around him was calling him lazy. There's a lazy guy, see his farm, or it's not clean, it's not clean there. It's not, there are no grasses, there are no cattle, there are no, so that guy is lazy. But nowadays he says that people are going there to learn with him. So it was hard. He learned how to have a honey farm. He has a honey production. He has avocado production. The farm is very, very rich actually. But people are going there to learn with him. But they are calling him lazy. That's how lazy guy, how he doesn't want to work. He stays. He's reading all day long. That's why he farms like that. Growing flower.
I think it's very important what you raised here. And also when we did a study on land development in Rochester, really superficial one. And that really, showed that young men were no longer interested in farming. Farming is it's exactly as though they were except on our grandfathers did. Look how they live. And so it's not, so they move either to the cities or they move outside in order to earn the money. It's really, it's a recognition thing.
Maybe suggest we move to the last talk, and then we do a general discussion. If other people have many questions, we will discuss very important
There's no more talk. Vai ser very short. Poderia incluir, é só um estudo caso.
Eu acho que é extremamente importante, principalmente para os estudantes que titularem dessa necessidade de gerar dados que realmente contribuem de alguma forma para promover algum tipo de mudança no sentido bom, porque só fazer paper, só fazer Não é um investimento para publicar, é para publicar. Sim, mas uma coisa que também, sabe, eu estou questionando aqui que eu também sempre gosto de questionar. Porque o meio ambiente no Brasil sempre perde o debate que nos perde a agricultura. Só baseado em noção de aplicado. É discussão, é exatamente estudar o livro, estudar na rua, até o livro. É verdade. Eu sei que mais difícil levar, como foi falado aqui, pela variabilidade, nós temos um trabalho mais difícil. É graça, né? Porque o sistema está aí, o sistema vamos discutir isso aí, muito dentro daí, o cara gosta muito de falar disso, dos casos aí, dos floresta, dos cuidados, dos do exemplo que está publicado no livro de 2 jornalistas dos 2 anos atrás, um livro e grande expectativa, um pacote de muita coisa, que vende produtos de produtos a publicidade das casas. Não é fácil.
Mas fazer consórcio não é fácil. Mas a foto do Leizão aqui, que falou isso que eu falei.
Ele é fantástico. Ele vai ser esse cara que é um exemplo que eu conheço também. Sabe, esse cara que chama de um cara inteligentíssimo. Sorry. The guy has mentioned generally that impression that really top guys in agroforestry they have a lot of their part. They don't have internal stuff, but they have amazing smart.
Eu vou passar uma lista daqui a pouco, não, em minutinhos, para vocês que têm interesse em terão certificado dessa participação aqui, eu passo em nome do livro para você.
Eu acho muito fazer perguntas para esse
Só na hora da saída, né? Terceiro nome. Bom, pessoal, super rapidinho aqui, é só um estudo de caso, que é um artigo, na verdade, que a gente já submeteu, e ele está em processo de distribuição, está na primeira rodada, na revista, como que chama a revista? What's the name of the magazine one more time? Energy for Sustainable Development. Vocês conhecem a revista, talvez alguns já. Então, esse foi um artigo que, na verdade, é um produto de uma tese de mestrado, de uma aluna nossa que terminou, a Olha, e fez parte também do Bioquality Project. A ideia aqui atrás foi a seguinte: bom, o fruto do baobá, na verdade, a polpa do baobá, como vocês viram, né, a Catherine falou, ela já é bem utilizada, né, para diversos produtos. Mas aí a ideia foi o que se faz com a casca, porque você extrai a polpa e a casca, né, jogando fora. Então a gente, lá no Malawi, a gente está com experiência de produzir dessa casca do baobá dejetos para cozinhar, não para cozinhar, para a geração de energia. O carvão, né? O nosso carvão natural da floresta. E a gente fez então um questionário para isso. Eu não vou explicar bem detalhes simples dessa coisa. Pode, né, me dar um e-mail que eu repasso. Na verdade, esse é um método de experimento chamado Discourse Experiment, um experimento de escolha discreta. Não sei se vocês já escutaram falar, vocês já viram que estou falando. Não? É um método estatístico e econométrico e na verdade, assim, é um pouco sofisticado, mas o resultado é muito interessante, muito fácil de entender. O que é que vem atrás? Bom, vem atrás o consumidor, ou o futuro consumidor, na verdade, é um produto que não existe ainda, né? Então a gente precisa saber se esse produto ele vai ser bem aceito, e se ele for bem aceito, quais propriedades ou atributos, características que mais agregam valor para esse produto, de acordo com as preferências do consumidor, né, ou do futuro consumidor. Para isso, a gente desenvolveu uma série de atributos, eu vou passar aqui. A gente desenvolveu uma série de atributos, né, e eu vou só dizer mais ou menos quais foram os atributos aqui, e de acordo com a informação que a gente teve dos locais, né, das pessoas, das comunidades, seriam os atributos que realmente as pessoas prestam atenção na hora de comprar a sua energia. Né? Na verdade, no Malawi existe pouquíssima eletricidade e até pouquíssimos fogões a gás, né? Como a gente vê aqui na maioria do Brasil, quase tudo a gás, eu acho que talvez tem mais de 90%, não sei, 80% pelo menos, nas áreas, até nas áreas rurais, aqui a gente ainda vê muito, né, a gás. Lá não, de fato, você tem ou lenha ou carvão, né? A lenha ela pode ser comprada ou ela pode ser extraída, né? Na verdade, agora é muito comprado também, até pelo tempo, né, de custo de oportunidade que você tem, ao invés de você trabalhar na sua rota, você tem que escolher lenha, então eles acabam comprando, que é muito bom. Ou então, mais perto da cidade, você tem a possibilidade também do carvão. Tá? Esse aqui ele foi um estudo urbano, na verdade, mas urbano e rural no Malawi ele é meio que assim, não dá muito para distinguir, né, vamos dizer assim, né? Não é como o Brasil, você tem diferentes estudantes de urbano e rural. O urbano e rural ele se aproxima um pouco mais, até pela pobreza do lugar. Né? Então, as características que a gente utilizou dentro desse questionário ele é super interessante porque ele é facinho da pessoa que está respondendo entender, tá? Porque eu vou te dar, na verdade, uma escolha e você vai dizer se você quer ou não. Então, isso é um tipo de questionário que para as comunidades rurais, que tem até um nível de qualidade bem baixo, eles vão entender muito fácil. Né? Até porque a gente tem com iPads, os iPads eles têm a figurinha, aí você só mostra, assim, e as pessoas dizem, esse eu quero, esse eu não quero, ou essa combinação eu gostei, ou essa eu não gostei. Então, assim, é super fácil de aplicar esse tipo de questionário. É mais difícil para a gente, mas é mais fácil para quem está respondendo, que é ótimo, né? Então, a gente teve as variáveis que a gente utilizou para isso, foi se a criança ajuda na colheita dessa energia, né? Se esse produto está sempre disponível no mercado ou não, né? No caso, o novo produto aqui era o produto do carvão feito, né, de baobá, vamos dizer assim. Outra coisa muito importante era se há formação de fumaça ou é a formação de fumaça. Existia muita ou pouca formação de fumaça. Ontem a gente visitou uma comunidade e foi algo que me lembrou muito essa pessoa do Malawi, porque a cozinha ela era toda aberta, né? E você podia ver na parede a fumaça, né? Assim, que fica grudada. Isso também é muito comum na África. Então, a formação de fumaça ela é importante, né? E também o quanto tempo aquele combustível, né, ele vai ficar queimando, né? O quanto tempo ele vai ficar queimando. Se ele rapidamente vai desaparecer ou se ele consegue segurar mais um pouquinho, né? E quanto tempo também eu preciso esperar para que meu corpo fique pronto, vamos dizer assim. Né? Quanto é o tempo para esperar que meu corpo ficar pronto, eu poder colocar minha comida lá e começar a caminhar. Né? Teve mais alguma coisa? E, obviamente, o preço do produto. Né? O preço do produto, a gente não tinha um produto que as pessoas, é um produto que no mercado não existe ainda. Então, o que a gente faz aqui é que a gente dá possibilidades de preço, do maior para o menor, e ver a aceitação do preço de acordo com os atributos. Aí você tem uma série de combinações. Você imagina, são vários atributos aqui, né? Cada atributo tem um nível. Por exemplo, fumaça, muita fumaça, nenhuma fumaça, média fumaça. Criança ajuda? Sim, às vezes, nunca. Tá? Então, assim, você faz toda essa combinação, né? E mais a combinação com preço. Ou seja, com isso como eu falei, é mais difícil para a gente modelar, fazer design, né, dentro do software, né, mas para quem está respondendo é super fácil, porque ele vai simplesmente ali no feeling dizer, esse aqui eu paguei um pouco mais. Não, mas esse atributo aqui não é muito importante para mim. Não, mas esse é mais importante para mim. E com isso, o software, ele consegue calcular o que a gente chama de marginal willingness to pay, ou a vontade, não a vontade, mas a disposição. Tem outra palavra na economia, mas a disposição ficou melhor que a minha. A disposição a pagar marginalmente, quer dizer, por cada unidade de produto. Tá? É óbvio que o consumidor ele não vai querer, na verdade, dizer o quanto ele quer pagar. Tá? Então, assim, isso é estatística e é óbvio, é uma questão de negociação também. Né? Geralmente, eu como consumidora, eu não estou disposta a dizer exatamente quanto eu quero pagar. Porque eu sempre vou tentar no meu trabalho. Né? Mas, tirando todas, claro, aí vem um pouco de estatística atrás, né? Assim, vocês não precisam entender tudo que está aqui. Mas o que é interessante entender é o que de fato contou para esses consumidores que a gente, né, tentou, foram mais ou menos 250 famílias, um número até bem grande, né, assim. Então, aqui a gente tem essa disposição a pagar, né, e os números positivos significam que são as linhas variáveis, eu vou explicar já mais bonitinho, tá? Aqui os números positivos, eles são realmente em relação a dinheiro, é quanto cada um dessas variáveis agrega, ou seja, se eu tenho aqui uma variável que deu negativa, como essa aqui, always, eu vou explicar para vocês o que é, então ela, na verdade, ela não agrega, ela desagrega o aumento de produção, né? Como essa daqui, assim, eu vou explicar mais para vocês, ela também desagrega, tá? E as outras variáveis, vocês podem ver, por exemplo, preço é algo que, nesse sentido aqui, a gente nunca coloca, porque preço é óbvio que sempre, quanto mais o preço, menor você vai pagar, isso não é importante. Mas o que é importante, o que eu vou resumir aqui, são as interpretações a partir daqueles valores, né? É claro, você também tem que fazer algum teste estatístico, ver se está significante, quais são, aí vem então a parte mais técnica, assim, né? Quais são as relações de variáveis, aí vem problemas de elasticidade, outras coisas mais técnicas, né? Tirando tudo isso, a interpretação que a gente teve foi a seguinte, que foi até, na verdade, bem dentro do que a gente esperava, né? Os consumidores, eles iam realmente gostar se para extrair aquele produto, né, as crianças não fossem necessárias, na verdade, eles não queriam, né, que a criança ajudasse nesse tipo de situação de desenvolver produto, né? Os consumidores, eles, na verdade, iam aceitar se aquele produto não tivesse sempre disponível, mas só às vezes, se faltasse um pouco, não ter problema. Não podia faltar sempre, mas faltando um pouco, não ter problema. Talvez aquela escassez que eles vivem no dia a dia, então eles meio que não tinha problema nenhum aceitar que faltasse um pouco. Por isso até é interessante. Era preferível que não existia nenhuma fumaça, na verdade, né? Mas se tivesse alguma fumaça também não havia problema. O que a gente também descobriu, pelo menos nessa amostra, foi que eles davam uma baixa valorização para o produto em relação ao quanto esse produto tem uma ajuda na conservação do meio ambiente. Claro, o que a gente tem que ver aqui é que a gente está numa sociedade completamente diferente, né, da sociedade europeia, brasileira, né, então a preocupação com o meio ambiente, ela está na pirâmide, obviamente, lá embaixo, né, óbvio, porque tem problemas aqui que são gritantes, maiores, né. O consumidor, ele também gostaria que, né, o consumo assim, for produtos is to be procured at a great interval. Eles também queriam que esse produto fosse comprado em intervalos maiores, ou seja, não preciso comprar todo dia, posso comprar uma vez por semana. Quanto maior o tempo de intervalo de compra, melhor seria, tá? Ou seja, não preciso comprar todo dia. E outra coisa interessante que a gente pensou foi que o tempo de espera antes do pouco estar pronto, vamos dizer assim, não foi relevante. Eu acho que talvez a variável, né, tempo nesse sentido aí não foi a mais relevante de todas. Assim, se você demorasse um pouquinho mais, eles não tinha muito problema, né? O preço que a gente sugeriu, né, ele foi o que a gente chama, né, perto de zero, mas não negativo. Nesse sentido, não quer dizer que o preço tem que ser zero. Se o preço fosse negativo, quer dizer que esse produto, ele, na verdade, ele não seria aceito de maneira nenhuma, né? Perto de zero, né, ainda foi positivo, na verdade, né? Quer dizer que o preço que a gente propôs, ele, na verdade, ele pode até ser aceito pela comunidade, né? Então, né, esse é um estudo de caso que a gente fez numa cidade chamada Aprofundar. A gente está com outro protagonista também, assim, que é a extensão dessa, né, uma outra área, né, porque algo disso foi feito em uma pequena área, em uma pequena cidade, né, pode ser que com outras variáveis, a gente também está colocando a questão da variação de tempo, né, pode ser que perto de lados seja diferente, ou estrutura diferente, a gente está modificando esse trabalho, né? Mas a intenção final é óbvio, que essa produção desse produto, ela está em andamento lá no lado experimental, mas a ideia é que quando esse produto está pronto de fato, no laboratório da universidade que a gente está desenvolvendo lá, que a gente venha dizer, olha, esse é o peso e essas são as características que esse produto tem que ter para que ele tenha uma boa aceitação no mercado, né? E ele venha, de fato, ele até substituir algum percentual, o carvão, a lenha. No caso aqui, como a gente está focando em urbano, seria mais a substituição ao carvão. É isso. Falei que ia ser pouco. Muito obrigada. Mas só para finalizar, o que eu queria dizer é que o que a gente fez aqui, né, com o Baobá, assim, porque eu apresentei, porque é uma ideia muito semelhante, é um método muito semelhante, quase, né, o mesmo método que a gente também poderia utilizar com produtos do Cerrado, né? Então, por isso que eu...
Existe dentro do barulho.
Olha aí. Para o Brickers. Né? Mas assim, esse Petrobras, mas é algo que esse método dele pode ser aplicado a qualquer tipo de novo produto, né? Então, assim, se a gente está falando de monetização de produtos, então é óbvio que a gente tem que ter um método de avaliação assim, para entender quais são as características que o consumidor prefere e o quanto cada característica vai poder adicionar valor, porque é algo que a gente não consegue um produto que seja um preço que as pessoas ainda consigam comprar e que seja maravilhoso em todos os aspectos, né? Então a gente tem que ter esse trade-off, entender quais são os atributos que mais agregam para ir focar nesses atributos. Obrigada. Perguntas? Perguntas? Então, eu tenho uma pergunta. Tem alguém que dizer, assim, nesse tipo de pesquisa, nesse tipo de trabalho, que alguém assim, que tenha a coragem, a loucura? Oi? Eu acho interessante.
Dá para ter comentários sobre o Brasil? Não? Ok. Bem, você quer fazer isso para os nomes aqui?
Isso para falar um pouco mais de como estamos no projeto.
Eu acho que eles vão poder desligar, então, não sei se não sei se eu faço, Eu só vou perguntar então para o professor de prova se vocês querem participar dessa fechamento, porque ele faz uma coisa mais informal aqui, porque os professores estão à vontade de falar, né? E aí a gente fecha a reunião. Eu vou só perguntar se eles vão participar também e já retorno. Just say that just to close up the meeting, probably like a round table speech, and then people can be more informal. Then I'll turn off the recording, and then just in case people can be a little more. Hey, Carlos, tudo bem? Carlos? Já foi? Deixa eu ver aqui. Ah, tá, já foi. O pessoal de Viçosa, Bianca, Felipe, Alefai, Jonas, Lucas, Otávio, Viviane.
Oi, Heraldo, tudo certinho, viu? Sem perguntas. O Carlos saiu, acho que para buscar a filha dele na escola.
Tá certo, então tá bom. Bom, a gente vai fazer um fechamento aqui agora, tipo uma mesa redonda. Aí, se vocês quiserem participar, a gente fecha. Eu só vou pedir pro Wesley. Wesley, você tá na linha? Acho que você já pode encerrar então o YouTube, né? Só vou agradecer então o pessoal que participou do YouTube. Muito obrigado aí pela participação. Aqui ainda tem uma galera que está ouvindo. E aí a gente fecha a apresentação no YouTube e faz o encerramento aqui, tá bom? Obrigado aí, viu, Wesley, pelo apoio, tá? Então tá bom, obrigado, tá? Aí o pessoal do time, se quiser continuar, pode continuar, a gente fecha a reunião aqui agora, tá? Eu vou deixar ligado.
Tá certo.
Então,